Good evening and welcome to the September 5th, 2023 meeting of the Milton Select Board. Before we begin, please join us as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Item 3 is public comment. For public comment, we allot now 21 minutes and 3 minutes apiece. And we'll go back and forth between in-person and online. And based on our policy and by the fact that we want to and we're required by law to treat everyone exactly the same and fairly, appreciate if you could do your best to end at 3 minutes, and we'll give you an indication when you're at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So hopefully you can wrap up by 30 seconds. By 3 minutes. That would be very helpful. I think we had a couple of people sign up here in person. So why don't we start with the in person, and then we'll go to online. And if you could just tell us your name and address, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, can you hear me? Is that fine?
Yes.
My name is Maggie Clark. My address is 1169 Brook Road. And I apologize for reading this, but I do better when I read.
And Maggie, if you could just make sure you're talking to the microphone so everyone can hear you.
Sure.
Great.
I would like to speak out tonight in support of the Milton Yacht Club. I'm not a member of the Milton Yacht Club, but my dad was, my husband is, and thus I've been a passenger and a boat owner, boating back and forth from the club countless times for close to 30 years. I currently have 2 boats docked at the landing. I'm also a parent of a 4-year member of the Neponset Rowing Club. In these capacities, I've been witness to what goes on at the landing and can rightfully say that I'm concerned about the future of this beautiful spot, which has become an area of contention in our town. The issue is complicated with many players, but a few things are certain. The town has declined to accept the club's bid for land on which to continue storing boats off-season. 2/3 of the Milton Yacht Club's income comes from this boat storage. Without income from boat storage, the Milton Yacht Club will dwindle and close over the next few years. The process of dwindling is well underway. The town wishes to improve, maybe modernize the landing, and I'm in favor of that. However, the town seems determined to make these changes at the expense of the Milton Yacht Club, and this is in direct opposition to the Milton Master Plan. I've read the master plan, and in terms of the landing, it aims to increase usage. I fully support this. The Milton Yacht Club shares this goal as well. They encourage use of the area through memberships to the club, as well as through their paddle sports membership, which allows for year-round locked storage of kayaks, paddle boards, and canoes. Currently, there are 25 paddle sport members. The Milton Yacht Club maintains the land, which is owned by the town, and the members' steady presence is a bulwark against crime, which, sad to say, is a downside of the somewhat secluded area. The Milton Master Plan explicitly states that town growth and change is to be accomplished with regard to the wonderful historic nature of our town. The Milton Yacht Club has existed for 118 years as stewards of the Milton Landing. Raking, mowing, weeding, maintaining floats, presenting a yearly scholarship for Milton High Senior, keeping the docks going, and all of those things are just a few of the long list of what they have been doing for many, many years. In closing, the Neponset River Town Landing is a beautiful estuary full of spectacular nature. However, it's a bit of a boating nightmare. No matter how many millions of dollars are poured into that area, it will always be a tidal river with muddy low tides twice a day, a strong current, a huge portion of no-wake zones to get out to the harbor,
20 seconds, Ms. Clark.
and the most aggressive horseflies and mosquitoes known to man, because they breed there in the mud flats. The area should be lovingly cared for. An improvement and change is fine, as long as it shows appreciation for the club that has been doing this for 118 years. Doing anything else is in direct opposition to what the Milton Master Plan lays out as a guideline for our town.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Thank you very much. All right, let's go to John Rowe. If we could promote John Rowe as his hand up.
Sure.
And So I'm going to time this one too, right? I time
Yep.
the individuals, that's right. Mr. Rowe, can you hear us, sir? Has he been promoted? Yeah.
Yep.
Mr. Rowe, can you hear us, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great.
I don't, can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Perfect. Okay. I'm trying to get my camera to turn on, but I guess you don't need to see me.
Well, if you can, we'd love to see you if you can do it.
Can you see me?
No, not yet.
All right. Well, we'll go without the camera.
All right.
Anyway, start my video. Try that.
There you are.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay. Good evening, folks. Thank you. The reason why I'm calling or asked to speak here is concerning the Mass DOT Rotary proposal at Randolph Ave and Chickatobit Road. I am 100% against a rotary at this intersection and I favor the a dedicated left turn lane with signalization on Route 28 for both north and southbound lanes. I know that the select board has written letters to Mass DOT, and I have the latest response from Mass DOT to the select board from Mr. O'Dowd. I believe that the town or people who are against the Rotary, and I think the town of Milton is, I don't know if they are or not, but I think that a united approach with Mass DOT, a united approach from perhaps, I don't know if you want to call it the opposition, but a united approach with Mass DOT, which would include all of the interested parties, and there are many interested parties here, and Milton, the town of Milton is a very small interested party. The intersection may be within the town limits, but the majority of people who use the intersection are not from Milton. And I think that what I think would be beneficial is if we got together with the town of Randolph, Avon, Brockton, the MBTA, DCR, Friends of the Blue Hills, and come up with what we think may be a better alternative. And just, you know, there are so many people involved in this, and I kind of think that there are probably 1,000 residents from Milton that this really affects. And those are people who live in my neighborhood. I don't know if I gave you my address, 23 Parkwood Drive, but it's people in the Hillside neighborhood and across Randolph Ave from me and the Hilltop neighborhood that are probably most affected by this. And not a lot of people from other parts of Milton are.
Excuse me,
But,
Mr. Rowe, 30 seconds, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so I'm just, I have reached out to Mr. Alexopoulos from the Randolph Town Council. I've attended a meeting there, and there are people at the Randolph Town Council that have mixed feelings about this. Some like it, some don't. And interestingly enough, Mass DOT has not had one single meeting with the town of Randolph, which probably 80% of the traffic that goes through that intersection every day is from Randolph.
Thank you, Mr.
And it's a
Rowe.
state highway. It's not cut through traffic. These people are just trying to get to their
Thank you.
jobs in Boston.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, one more, just one more comment.
Well, we have if we let one person.
You
go-
have a letter from
Okay.
Mr. O'Dowd,
Yep.
which
We
said
have it.
nothing. I have a meeting with his boss tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.
Great.
If anybody is interested in how that goes,
Okay.
let me know.
Okay.
I'm happy to send you a summary, but I don't think the board is interested in collaborating with all of the interested parties. That's what I'm not a good orator, but I'm just asking that everybody start collaborating with all interested parties.
Thank
And
you.
I think we'll get a better outcome.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Thank you, sir.
So who should I contact?
Mr. Milano. Mr. Milano, Town Administrator. Or anyone on the board, for that matter. You have our address, our email addresses are all online, so you can call the town offices, contact Mr. Milano or any member of the board. Certainly it's welcome information. So let's go to someone in person. Is Mr. Johanning. Mr. Johanning.
Hi, Phil Johanning, 23 Parkwood Drive. I just wanted to talk about the same intersection as John just mentioned. And, you know, I keep wondering, what do people think makes it dangerous? I really liked what Roxanne asked when she said, who is familiar with the intersection? I am familiar with the intersection because I go through it multiple times a day. And the things that I think make it dangerous, I noticed in the Milton Times that Mike Zulis, maybe they didn't understand you, Mike, but they said that you said that the left turn arrows have been turned off. They haven't been turned off. The problem is that it's a temporary arrow. It's on for maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then it goes off and it's green. And what happens is people need to continue to make a left-hand turn. But because of the hill and because there's traffic coming at you, turning in the opposite direction, you can't see the person in the far, I'll call it left lane. You can't see them at all. So you're in the middle of the intersection and you think you can turn, and a car comes plowing through the intersection and runs into you. That's why the left-hand turns are so dangerous. And I agree with John. What we need is dedicated turn lanes in each of the four pieces of the intersection. And that turn arrow, when it goes off, you need to stop turning. That's what happens with the light green, and you can make a left turn on green. It's bound to cause trouble. The person who caused the party that caused problems in the intersection was MassDOT. It's a poorly designed intersection, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that it needs some enhancements, and those enhancements would be dedicated turn lanes in each of the four pieces of the intersection, a left-hand turn arrow, and when it goes off, no more turns. That would protect people. We don't need to do anything else. Maybe one other thing that could change is the hill. When people are coming over the hill, they can't see what's going on in the intersection. Now they say they're going to move
Excuse me, 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
intersection to the south. That would take it to the top of the hill and improve visibility. But right now, the way it is, someone comes flying over the hill and, you know, it's bound to cause disaster. So I think it just needs a redesign, but the basic design is okay. And I think it better serves the public that needs egress from the side streets and from other neighbors like me.
Thank you, Mr. Johanning.
Thank you.
Right on time. All right, next online, we have Kathleen Krogan-Kamara, RN.
All right, promoter now.
Promote. Have we had the person promoted?
They have not accepted it, essentially.
Okay. So Kathleen Krogan-Kamara.
No, she comes-
Oh,
yeah,
she's
coming
coming out.
out.
Okay.
Oh, declined to be, never mind. Perhaps they did not intend to have their hand raised.
All right, so Kathleen Krogan-Kamara, you have your hand raised. If you want to speak, we'd happy to have you, but you have to accept the promotion to panelist. Let's give it one more try to see if the promotion is accepted.
Not looking likely.
No? All right, well, why don't we move on to
Okay.
the next person here in person. I don't see anyone else in the online.
Not at this moment.
Is that it?
Correct.
Yep, okay, so anyone else? Mr. Funley.
Hi, I'm Jay Funling. I live at 39 Sias Lane, and I worked as a pension actuary for 15 years. A great way to start any subject of conversation. I'm here tonight because the town's pension actuary has presented his valuation findings to the town, and this is a great opportunity for this board to revisit the pension and retiree medical funding policies. Some people call retiree medical OPEB. You might have heard that abbreviation. Now, I say pension and retiree medical together because these two employee benefits programs should be considered linked when setting up any funding policy. No policy should be set up for one without considering the other. Of course, the final authority on pension funding is not this board, but is the town's retirement board. But guidance from this board would be very helpful to the retirement board. The rating letter the town received from S&P in January expressed concern of, and I'm quoting, contribution volatility for these programs. The ratings agencies don't want the town to have variable, unpredictable contributions to these programs. And I dare say, the town doesn't want to have variable, unpredictable contributions to these programs. You can decrease the variability of these contributions with the correct policy for these programs. Or you can increase the unpredictability and variability if not done properly. It's entirely up to you. So I encourage the establishment of a policy that will meet with the approval of the plan's actuary, which considers the pension contribution, the OPEB trust contribution, and retiree medical current payments all as part of a holistic policy. This is needed fairly soon to allow the retirement board to act when required by law. I won't go on because I know Mr. Milano may discuss this later in the meeting as part of his town administrator's report. But I would like to close by saying, I know this is not as exciting as headline grabbing as the other things on your agenda tonight, but it is important and it is timely. A member of the retirement board stated in a public meeting that they're looking for guidance from you. So I look forward to this issue being on your agenda 2 weeks from now and being voted on at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. All right, back to the online. Again, Kathleen Krogan Kamara, RN, has a hand up. Happy to have you speak, but you'd have to accept a promotion. So let's try one more time. Nick, if we could try, I don't know.
I did, yeah.
Oh, you did, okay. And if we don't get anything, we'll move on. Nothing? All right, anyone else in person or online for citizen speak? Going once, going twice. All right, item 4, discussion approval of Massachusetts Department of Transportation project at the intersection of Randolph Ave and Chickatobit Road. And this is a follow-on from our last meeting. And Mr. Milano, if you want to tee this up, we have Mr. Mello, Town Council, with us. So if you
Sure.
want to take it away.
So we had discussed at a previous meeting following up with Mass DOT in some capacity and speaking with Town Council about perhaps another way to approach the state and with perhaps a communication from Town Council. I've had a couple conversations with Mr. Mello about that, and I'd turn it over to him to take it from there. And we're happy to help and facilitate whatever the board wants to do next. So, Mr. Mello, why don't you go from there?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Good to see everybody. So, yeah, I mean, obviously in the context of an open meeting, it's not prudent, and it probably would be premature, I think, to talk about the possibility of any, or the merits or existence of any potential claims. And, I think you want to reserve, as everyone on the board knows well, executive sessions for instances where, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you want to maybe talk into the
Okay.
microphone. and
Sorry.
Make sure we have, yeah. maybe.
Sure, is that better?
Much better.
Okay.
Much better, thank you.
So basically, my thought is that we could, in advance of the board's next meeting, analyze that issue and vet potential options and the existence or merits of any potential claims and report back to the board in a confidential memo that you could review ahead of the next meeting and then basically take it from there. In the meantime, or on a contemporaneous track, we could, I'm happy to prepare a letter to Mass DOT inviting them to meet to discuss any concerns. I noticed that in some of the recent communications, they've asserted that they've addressed the technical concerns that had been raised by the town in the past, including in a during meetings in July and September of 2019. I'm, happy to prepare a letter to them. I don't know how it would be received or what the response would be, but we can certainly do that, and perhaps we should do that. Now, provided the board wants to go that route, I'm happy to entertain any thoughts or input that, from the board about what we should address or raise in a letter like that. Obviously, I'm just coming into this, so any information that you can provide to me in terms of what the technical concerns are, issues that you think we need to, flag for DOT, I'm all ears. I noticed that seems like one of the more prominent issues that had been vetted was the concept of a left turn signal. They suggested in their most recent letter that they vetted that and determined that it wasn't the safest option, and that in their view the roundabout option is the safest design, and that apparently the funding upon which they're relying for the project requires that they choose the safest alternative available. So I'm not sure what we would say to rebut that, but if you want to discuss that with me at any point at this meeting, or you feel free to call me, or I'd be happy to meet to talk about what we want to raise specifically to address their response on that point, among other points. My thought is that ultimately, in order to really to rebut a lot of these technical issues, and certainly if the town wanted to pursue any legal proceedings in connection with this matter, it would, as a practical matter, need to retain a traffic consultant or expert, which obviously comes at a cost. But I don't think we need to solve that today, but that's something that would lie ahead if we wanted to really get pursue the technical issues substantively.
Thank you, Mr. Mello. Comments or questions from the board? Ms. Musto.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple of comments. The first one is when they came in here, it was a representative, I think Josh Bartas, and then a couple of people from Howard Stein Hudson, and they came in and we asked them all sorts of questions. One thing was with their report that they had, that I had a copy of, they had cited that this was the best alternative. They said that they had 4 alternatives they looked at. I asked for the other 3. Where's the data? It was never in that report. So I'm concerned that they sort of, in 2019, went with this idea, but they never strayed from it. And did they actually really look at these other alternatives? Their own report did say, and I think I said this at that meeting, that it will increase the queue times, for instance, on Chickatabbit itself. So the backups will be more. And they acknowledge it in their own report. So that is one thing. Since October, when they did their Zoom meeting, we were supposed to have an on-site meeting, because the one in 2019, 3 of us were not even on the board at that point. And that never happened. That was asked for in October last year. And here we are, almost, pretty soon, almost a year later, right? So that's concerning to me. The other thing is, many, many years ago, I think it might have been 2003 or 5, right around there, when they redid that roadway, 28, my understanding was they were supposed to flatten that hill and put the turn signals in at that point, and somehow that didn't happen. So somebody thought I believe somebody thought it was okay then. What's changed since then? The other thing that came up when we had all discussed this with the members that were here, they had talked about looking at the whole corridor. And I think Ms. Bradley might have asked a question about, okay, if you put, or maybe Mr. Zoll, if you put this roundabout in and you have to change something, then will you have to go back potentially and adjust that? And they said, well, yeah, that could be. So that's a concern. And then where would the traffic go when they do this? It's a 2-year project. I think, a lot of, even the tone of that last letter, it was very short. I feel like it didn't really answer much in their letter, and it just, it's basically a little bit over a page. And, the people that are actually working on the project, I asked them if any of them travel this way. None of them do. So they're not familiar, as a user would be, any of us who might go there, or some of the neighbors that use this every day. So I'm concerned. For 1,800 people to come forward in a petition against it is pretty remarkable. That's a pretty large number of people to be opposed to something. And not for at least, all we asked for was them to pause it. We didn't, we said, let's pause it and get some more information, look at the corridor, and in the meantime, do a temporary fix if you can with dedicated turn lanes and signalization. And, again, this is going to take like 2 years to do. So I don't think these are any solutions. I am in favor of, first of all, I think we should do a letter and from you as our town attorney, but I also think it should go to a bunch of other people that maybe weren't cited on this, and maybe we could discuss who else we think the letter should go to. I just thought the response was very inadequate. We're representing our residents, and I think it's very inadequate. The other thing is, I know there was a gentleman who came on tonight who was talking about, look at some of these other communities, and I believe I had mentioned that at a previous meeting, and I don't know if, Mr. Milano, if you've reached out or if anybody has reached out to any of our surrounding communities about this issue. But I believe we mentioned that at the last meeting that we talked about this, or the time before. Because it's always good to have some support there, or people that are maybe concerned about this. So the other question I guess I do have about the whole project is there any taking of land from neighbors by eminent domain? Are you aware of anything on that level to make this happen? Because my understanding is that there may be.
Right, yeah, wasn't that addressed in one of the letters?
And that's a concern too from some of those residents, that here we have a project that is not supported by many people who have concerns, and they're also taking land from residents that are our residents. So I do have concern about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I listened with interest. I think Mr. Rowe mentioned that he has a meeting with someone from DOT tomorrow morning. That sort of jumped out
Yep.
and caught my attention. So perhaps there's a willingness from DOT to meet with the town.
Okay.
Mr. Wells?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my take on this is a little different. Clearly, 10 years as chair of the Traffic Commission, and I've spoken in the past, also investigating, I don't even know how many accidents and how many fatals I've gone through there over my 3+ decades in the police department. But I was on the board when MassDOT first brought this on, and I accompanied Mr. Dennehy to District 6 when they first presented it. We had asked for someone to come out. Howard Stein Hudson came on board as well. I believe that was our request because we wanted some expertise on our behalf. At the time they were handling the square as well. They had done some work for us. I was shocked myself when I first heard them say about it, and I know that a lot of people say, oh, it's easy, put a left. The causation, and remember, they've pulled all the black box data, they've pulled all the fatal investigation, all the serious bodily injuries, and that's the only reason they're back here. When they did the major rehaul of Route 28, it's about 15 years ago now, they took out a big chunk of that hill and did widen and upgrade all the signalization there with the idea that that would lessen the serious bodily injury and fatal accidents at that intersection. However, congestion and volume, as we all know, is a serious problem here every day, particularly on Route 28 and 138, just increased. Ways increased it. And so I wish it was as easy as turning lanes. That was their first thought, that could rectify it, but they realized that the number of fatalities here, I believe, were in the top 5 of serious bodily accidents for an intersection in the Commonwealth, is where they came to the rotary idea. And it's a roundabout, not a rotary, excuse me. And Mr. Zulus, you may have been on the board. I think you were, because Ms. Collins was here. And if she was here, you would have been. You might remember a presentation we got from AARP around the 25%, when they came into the 25%, about how effective roundabouts are in the United States of America today at preventing serious bodily injury and vehicular accidents. And in that year, I think 2019, there had been 14,000 new ones constructed across the country. And I hear, it's one thing, to change this, change that. I know I'm being a little lengthy here. This is a serious, serious intersection. And this took a lot of work. And I've looked at this 100 different ways. And I understand how they came to this conclusion. They came to the conclusion because it's the safest thing to do at this intersection. And that's the reason, I mean, I spent my whole life in public safety. That's the reason I supported the, what they presented to us as putting a roundabout there. Thank you. That's my only comments on that. And for town council, if he wants any historic, I'll be glad to talk to him anytime.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of quick points on this. I think in regards to a letter, which I do think I agree with Ms. Musto that we should put something together. A couple of things that have stood out to me, both in reading the letter and then also from this evening. I think, for one, the letter promises to keep the community informed and involved in the development of the project and the ongoing corridor study by the design team, not limited to active participation in the roadway safety audits, as well as shared findings and recommendations. So I think that's a broad promise with no timetable, no schedule, no understanding of when when the study is due to be completed, when residents will be surveyed, how they're going to go about surveying residents. How are they going to select the residents to survey? I think we know that there's a lot of folks that are going to be impacted by this that are downstream, for lack of a better term, of where this rotary is. And so, I think we should be asking them for a detailed plan about how they're going to go about doing this. They also have said that they don't believe that that left turn signals are appropriate for the intersection, but at Citizen Speak this evening, we heard from Mr. Joining that they're functional, and so it would be good to clarify what's happening. And if indeed that they are functional, then why wouldn't we seek to make them safer if they're going to be on? I hope that they won't then use this letter as an excuse to turn them off. But I think certainly it seems like they're not informed about if those arrows are indeed going on. They don't seem to be informed about it, which seems to be problematic from the Department of Transportation. I think, finally, I agree with Mr. Wells on the overall safety of rotaries. I think that there's, study after study. I don't think anybody's debating the fact that rotaries or roundabouts as a general concept tend to be safer. I think the real concern that we have here is that we are robbing Peter to pay Paul, where we're going to get some safety improvements at this intersection, but we're going to lose them further into Milton as folks from side streets are going to be forced into trying to make turns that are going to be more dangerous because the traffic flow won't stop. And so I think and this is what we discussed with the group generally, is proceeding in a way without a full understanding of the ramifications for the rest of the town. That's where and I think a lot of other folks have the real problem. I don't think that there's a roundabouts are bad and we shouldn't build them sentiment. I think there's a let's understand what the consequences of this roundabout are going to be to all of the Milton residents who live in that area. And frankly, Randolph residents and other folks that are there. Because I think, to Mr. Wells's point, if you go back through the logs and look at who has been deceased at a lot of these accidents, they're not going to just be Milton residents. They're going to be Randolph residents, Avon residents, and other residents of other towns who I would think they would want to make sure that their citizens are able to commute safely. So I'm in favor of a follow-up letter. I'm in favor of a follow-up letter quickly. I'm also in favor of an executive session and memo to discuss our other alternatives. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bradley.
Just real quick, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am reading the letter. I've always stated that this is not a town road. I've said that from the beginning, that the expectations of those that we serve need to understand that we are at the mercy of the state and at the mercy of the transportation department. While I may not agree with the tone that they do things, while I may not agree with the letters that they write to us, ultimately this is their road, and I just want to keep reiterating that so folks remember it. In this letter, the last letter that they sent us, the short one that Ms. Musto was referencing, it says here that they're putting this out to bid this month. So while we're looking at short-term solutions, We can do another letter. We will get another letter back. It will basically dismiss us again. I have no faith that they will actually listen to us. I don't. This is not the first time that DOT has not taken anything we've had to say into consideration. And so I'm just curious, as a board, what we're going to do here. So we have residents, we have 1,800 people, we have all this stuff, right? They're going out to bid September 2023. It's that month. And they're going to basically, they're going to have this done with, which means bid and approved by the end of this year. So we can do all the letters we want. I'm really interested in the alternative things that we can do, Mr. Mello. So what does that mean for us as a town? Are there options that you can present to us that we could, possibly take action upon? I would love to see that, because right now it is a state road, and I grew up right off of a state road, just probably like Mr. Johanning lives right now in Agawam, and it's got the 57 rotary, so we've got a state road that goes right into, it's now called Six Flags. So I was used to a lot of traffic growing up and a rotary that I couldn't get off of. So I understand it. I just also remember that it was a state road and there was nothing that we that lived right there could do. So I'm interested in other things, and I appreciate your effort on that, because I don't want to do a lot of, we send them a letter and then they have 2 weeks or whatever to get back to us, and then we're at the end of September and they've already got their bids in. So that kind of leaves us behind the 8 ball. I just wanted to point that out. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. So on that score, let me suggest if we have council prepare a letter, that may be a marker. A letter from a lawyer is maybe a bit more of a marker. And if we combine that with an executive session to consider other legal alternatives, then perhaps we're going down parallel paths on that. I will say, just for the purpose of Mr. Mello, I think there are the project and long-term solutions, and then there's the short-term. And I think the long-term issues have been articulated very well. The short-term is something that beguiles me, and Mr. Johanning mentioned that the left turn signals are on. I have to tell you, I mean, maybe they went on in the last few weeks, but I was trying to take that left-hand turn several times on to going towards Randolph, and there was no light, so maybe it wasn't working then. But whenever I've done that, there's been no left-hand turn signal for me to take a left off that left lane. So I guess that's something that we need to figure out. And indeed, Master EOT doesn't seem to think that those left turn signals are on, because they said Master EOT has considered the option to provide short-term left turn signals, short-term. However, the options to provide these in the short term within the existing footprint of the roadway are not feasible based on the existing current corridor demand. And that, as we discussed last week, says nothing about safety. It's all about how many cars we can get through the intersection, and that's what the state is telling us. They're not concerned about safety in the short term. They're concerned about cars going through the intersection. So I think if we proceed down both those paths, then maybe we'll at least be trying to exhaust all of our opportunities. So is there any? It seems like there's a consensus to proceed that way,
Do we need a motion for that?
I don't think we do, unless anyone wants to call for it. I think the consensus is let's have Mr. Mello prepare a letter that we can consider next week, next Tuesday, in our open session, and then we'll have an executive session on legal alternatives. If that's acceptable to the members?
Yes.
Any other comments or questions?
One question I have, in case anyone's aware, but I noticed reference in one of the letters to a MEPA approval process. I don't know if MEPA review has been secured, or if it's forthcoming, or if anyone knows anything about that.
They have, pardon me, Mr. Milano, I mean, as far as I know, we haven't, that's not been communicated to the town.
Okay. Okay.
they may be proceeding down that path on their own without telling us what's going on.
Yeah.
But Mr. Wells has his hand up, and he may have something to add. Mr. Wells?
I do believe, I am familiar with some of the MEPA stuff from my time on the State's Homeland Security Council. So anytime you're going to touch state, particularly some of this Blue Hills Reservation, you're going to need MEPA approval. And I do recall them talking about that the last time they were here, that they would have, because there's definitely some pieces of DCR land on both sides of the intersection that are going to be impacted.
Okay.
Thank you. Helpful.
Any other comments or questions on this? Thank you, Mr. Mello, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Item 5, discussion approval renewal contract with Coastal EMS LLC for ambulance services. And Mr. Milano, if you
Sure.
want to tee this up for us.
Thank you. So I sent the select board an email this afternoon just with a little bit more information on this, but our contract with what had been Fallon, which became Transformative, which became Coastal, expired on June 30th of 2023. We did have the option to execute a 2-year extension to that existing contract, but since it had been through so many iterations, we had been engaging with Coastal on renewing the contract and starting fresh. And I'll note that Kevin Mont and Ted Carroll from Coastal are both in the audience today, so we appreciate them coming. We've had a very productive, collaborative contracting process with Coastal since they took over. They ended up purchasing Transformative last fall. One of the issues that we had been dealing with previously was long response times and a heavy reliance on mutual aid from other communities for ambulance services. And one of the first things that Coastal did was put a second ambulance in the town of Milton. That started in January. The new contract that's in front of you is for 3 years with mutual option to extend for 2 additional 1-year terms. It incorporates into the contract a requirement that there are 2 ALS advanced life support level ambulances in Milton, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, dedicated to the town of Milton. In addition to that, there will be a 3rd ALS level ambulance in Milton for 10 hours a day. That's also available to other communities as well as to healthcare institutions here in Milton and elsewhere. But this level of support is something that was clear from Coastal from the beginning when we started to engage with them, and we were able to wrap into contract language. Coastal also provides ambulance services in Brookline, Dedham, and Newton. Other parts of the contract include training for Milton Fire, restocking of medical supplies for Milton Fire and Police, equipment for Milton Fire such as Lucas cardiac machines that provide CPR. We have 3 presently. We'll be gaining a 4th through this contract. And they're also giving other equipment to the town, including AEDs for general town use as we see fit. And the contract also contains provisions for quality assurance and review, as well as potential penalties if there are any issues along the contract as we go. Chief Madden, Chief King, Town Council, and I worked on the contract. It's ready for signature. If the board is set with it, happy to take any questions or introduce the team from Coastal if you would like.
Ms. Musto.
Hi, thank you. I have a quick question. Where are our AEDs currently located, and does this include training for employees to understand how to use an AED?
So the training is specific to Milton Fire and Milton Police for AEDs, but whenever we've reached out to Coastal, they have been willing and able to support town events and town initiatives. So if we were to reach out, we do have AEDs located throughout different facilities already. These would be 2 additional. We've been talking with Parks and Rec about making them available at athletic fields for events and for the sports leagues. That's becoming a very pressing issue, but that's something that they'll provide them, and then we have the ability to decide kind of what the best process is for that moving forward. Yes.
Follow-up question,
Sure.
thank you. Will they be able to check the batteries and everything on them, like a yearly, because you do have to do some
That will be
follow-up
our
on
responsibility, but it would be, once they need to be replaced, it'll be up to
that? Okay,
them to be replaced.
that's very important on those.
Other comments? Oh, Mr. Wells.
Thank you. Let me put that down. So I just want to thank the team from Coastal, most people don't know that even though Fallon sold to Transformative and Transformative is now Coastal, the main components of the management team, particularly the operational staff, and a good deal of the medics who've been invested in this community for a long time, have stayed with the company, is still servicing the residents, which that says a lot for patient care and as well as medical control, which they receive, which gives them the ability to provide ALS quickly. My only thought to you is usually it's 5-year contracts. As you know, Mr. Milano, I was involved in many of these myself. I just think you make yourself a little bit easier to do a 3-year and just extend for 2 instead of have to, you have so many things you have to do in a given year. A 1-year option is kind of just work that you wouldn't need to do. It might be easier for you to just, I would suggest amending it a 3-year with the option to amend it for 2 for a total of 5. And that'd be pretty much it. And I just want to thank them for everything, and I want to thank them for addressing the park and rec issue, because I know AEDs on the fields has been an issue for some time.
So just in terms of how to get this done, I suppose we could, since the Transformative representatives are here, we could try to negotiate that right now, or we could wait and.
My gut is, Mr. Chair, they would agree with this, and I think, and as I said, Mr. Milano told me this today, because I just asked him, and I'm like, you have enough things on your plate. If you're going to go for 5, do a 3 and an option for 2 to renew, and then it's just one thing less you have to do in a given year, and it keeps the continuity of medical care intact. People don't realize how important it is. It's part of the triangle of public safety in this community: police, fire, and EMS, and it's something you don't want to. If you can deal with it today and get 5 years, do it. Make your life easier. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Mr. Milano, any thoughts on that?
I don't have very. Generally, when we're going beyond the 3 years, we try to keep the town's option to exit, if necessary, available to us. But I don't feel super strong one way or the other. In this case, I think we expect to have a very successful agreement here, and we anticipate exercising both of those options. So I'm happy to leave as is. I'm happy to make that change. I don't feel super strongly one way or the other.
All right. Ms. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that, and given the fact that we can just continue the contract after 3 years, we have no idea what's going to happen in the next 3 years. God forbid, but something could happen in the next 3 years. I'm going to move to approve the contract with Coastal EMS LLC for ambulance services and authorize the town administrator to sign on the board's behalf.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and second. Any discussion? I think that the point is well taken by Mr. Wells. Though effectively, what it will take is one more approval, right? Approving it for 1 year and then having a second approval for the second year rather than having one approval for the 2 years. So, in the interest of getting it done, since the contract was termed out on June 30th, and the headline here is that we're getting more coverage and better coverage right away, 2 ambulances and 3 if we need it. And so while I think the point's very well taken, I'm happy to get going. How about this? How about we? And I'm trying to bridge the gap here. How about we approve it tonight, Richard, and we can always amend it. Maybe we can have a discussion. And I see the Coastal fellas shaking their heads. But we could always amend it to make it 2 years down the line.
Shaking their heads in which direction?
Well, I'm sorry. They're nodding in approval. They're nodding and smiling.
For those at home who can't see.
Nodding in approval. Yes,
it only makes, Michael, I'm fine with that. It only makes sense. And I know this, Mr. Milano came from a municipal-based community. It's the continuity of your patient care and keeping this in place is critical. And I could go on for an hour, the pluses and the minuses, as both Coastal reps know. But I'm fine with that. If you want to, I'm fine if I'll second Ms. Bradley's, I don't know if it was seconded, I'll second her motion, and we can come back and discuss this at a later time.
Okay, great.
I'll talk to Mr. Milano personally as well.
Great. Any further discussion? All those in favor, this will be a roll call vote. Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. All right, thank you. And thank you to the coastal representatives, and appreciate better coverage and more coverage. It's big news that we're going to have those dedicated ambulances and the additional coverage to the extent we need it. So that's great. Thank you very much. All right, item 6. Item 6, discussion select board's role regarding MBTA Communities Act. We included this on the agenda because there seemed to be some lack of clarity about what the select board's role here with the MBTA Communities Act is. Both some discussion here about whether it's appropriately in select board's lane, and discussion elsewhere. And so we thought it important to just lay out what are the select board's responsibilities under its policies, what the law says, what our bylaws say, and what has been the practice of this board and other boards in town. And so I'll just very quickly lay out what we have in our policies and under the law, and what's happened in our practice, just so we have some clarity, and then we can discuss it. As I think we all know, the select board select board is the chief executive authority of the town and responsible for policy direction of the town. And under our powers and responsibilities according to our policy, that includes recommending and evaluating policy and action on land use issues. So that's our authority according to our policies and according to the town bylaws as the chief executive authority of the town. Now, what about specifically beyond our policy with respect to zoning? Our bylaws tell us that the zoning bylaws, including the zoning map, may be changed from time to time by amendment, additional or repeal, but only in the manner provided by General Laws, Chapter 40A. So that takes us to Chapter 40A of the Massachusetts General Laws. And Chapter 40A of the Massachusetts General Laws specifically provides that adoption or change of zoning ordinances or bylaws may be initiated by the submission to the City Council or the Board of Selectmen of a proposed zoning ordinance or bylaw by a Board of Selectmen, Board of Appeals, an individual whose land is affected, registered voters under the statute, by the planning board as well, and by a regional agency. So according to the statute and according to our bylaws, the select board it is certainly within the select board's lane to initiate changes or to initiate changes to zoning ordinances and zoning in the town. And that's specific, and it is explicit that the select board has that authority. Now, what's been the practice? Have we done this before? Well, we have. Now, I haven't gone back and checked everything and checked the records, but I remembered, and it turned out it was less than 2 years ago, this board decided to take a vote and act on a development at 440 Granite Avenue. And this board was asked, prior to the decision of the planning board, to weigh in on its view of a concept plan for 440 Granite Avenue. And this board did that, as it has presumably in the past under its authority and under its policies and under its actions. So if we look at our policies, if we look at the bylaws of the town, if we look at Massachusetts law, and if we look at the practice of this board in the past, there should be no surprise or no confusion or no shock or no lack of clarity that this board certainly, if it wishes to, has the authority and has in fact acted under that authority in the past to initiate proposed changes to the zoning for town meetings. So that's kind of the law, and so I just want to open it up just so make sure we're all we're all clear on what that provides. So comments or questions on this item? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. Thank you for going through that. I have a couple of comments that I would like to say. The first one is also one of our responsibilities under our duties and responsibilities as the chief executive officers of the town is a fiduciary responsibility for town's finances. With that being said, anything that of this magnitude that we're talking about, has consequences in terms of cost, with sewer, for instance, and water, police and fire protection, safety, the impact on schools. We have no idea what those costs are. And so as somebody who has a fiduciary responsibility for the town finances, that's a concern. The other concern I would say is what you can do and what you should do and what seems more ethical of what you can do. Those are a bunch of topics that I think pertain to this. We have a planning board who's elected who has been taking this up, and we have a town planner who's been having all sorts of forums for this and getting feedback and working very hard on this issue. The planning board is as well, and they have consultants that they've brought in. And we're still waiting to hear the final reports from those consultants. Planning board, it's my understanding, the planning board and our town planner have said that they feel like they will need more time to have an adequate plan. And they would like to consider asking the state for more time. Again, according to our laws, I suppose we could do some of this. But again, I would say, should we? We have a planning board that has been concentrating on this. We are getting this information, in a manner where we're just hearing little bits and pieces. The last time that we had the meeting, Tim had the two options, 1 and 2, and all of the charts weren't even filled out at that point. I saw some information that came through at 3 o'clock this afternoon from Tim with some more information on dimensional analysis and so forth. We are rushing a process which will affect the entire town, which has huge implications, not just for particular areas that might be impacted, but for the entire town. Now again, you say that it's in our purview, that we can do all of this. That's great, Mr. Zulus, but again, should we allow our planning board to give us the information? And they are vetting this, and they have the consultants in to get us information. Your own town planner and planning board feels that we may even need more time to do this properly. This is a rush job on something that is very important for our town. So that is, I think those are concerns.
Mr. I will just say, I understand that, appreciate it. One of our primary responsibilities under our policies is to the residents of the town, and I understand planning board, they're doing their work, and that's great, and we look forward to getting their views, and we're sharing our views. But we have a responsibility to the residents. We have to think about the residents, and we weren't elected by the planning board or the town planner. We were elected by the residents, and so I think it's important for us to focus on that part of our policy, that we have to do something for the residents, and we may decide that this is part of that. At least we have in part so far. Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick points, because I think right now, for this discussion purposes, we're just talking about our role,
yes,
and we're not talking about the specific article. But in terms of the role, the fiduciary responsibility is something I think that we all take very seriously. I think if we're going to take that seriously, I think we have to sort of address the false dichotomy that has been presented, I think, by some folks, that it's either that we have an article into our December town warrant and we go forward with this, or that we don't go forward with this, or we somehow manage to just take a couple of small penalties and that's it. And the real choice here is whether Milton, the town of Milton and its elected officials, of which we are some, and of which town meeting are some, whether those elected officials decide to set how we're going to zone per this law, or whether we let developers do it. Because we have heard time and again from developers, from real estate professionals, some of the less scrupulous members of that profession would like nothing better for this town to fail to act. Because if we fail, they will come in, they will purchase land, they will begin building what they want, and they will sue us for being out of compliance, and they will win. And if you need to know how this play goes, just look at Milton's failure to build enough affordable housing, and now what we see with the 40B developments. We know how this works. It's not a choice of whether we do this or whether we don't do this. It's a choice of whether we do this or whether developers who aren't from Milton, who aren't elected, do it for us. And so I think as far as any sort of responsibility that we have to our town, to the residents of the town, we have to keep that first and foremost in mind. Second, I take issue with the idea that this is a rushed process. We have known about this law for years. The planning board has known about this law for years. We are now in a position where we need to put something into the warrant, and there are time limits for us to do that. The planning board has had a couple of years to get this together. We are now in September. Town meeting is in December. If we fail to pass an article on this in our town meeting in December, we will be out of compliance, subject to lawsuits, subject to developers moving in, subject to things that we would all, I think, prefer not to have happen. I am in favor, if the planning board feels like it needs more time and they want to put forward a request to the state to get more time and they're successful in getting more time, great. That would be great to have more time. It's always nice. But everyone knows that you have to plan for the worst case scenario. We know this. We know that we have to have something in place in case the state decides, and we have heard from earlier discussions this tonight, that the state doesn't always agree with what a little town like Milton, as much as we value ourselves, our overall impact on state decision making, they may very well tell us you're out of luck. And so if we put in for an extension and we wait until October or November and we hear that we're out of luck, then we are really going to be out of luck, because we are now going to put the town in a position where these decisions, like I've said before, are being made by developers, and they're being made by people who are not elected officials. So I think we've certainly given the planning board time. I have indicated to members of the planning board in individual conversations that I would be happy to see them put something forward together. I think that what we're doing is the right thing. If they want to pick this up and make suggestions, that would be great. We would love to see that. But the idea that this is a rushed process when it's been a statewide law for multiple years that we've known about, and we are now, yes, under the gun a little bit because we have failed to get some of this work done, that doesn't mean that we're rushing the process. It just means that we've left ourselves less time to do the work that we need to do. But the most important thing is that we do that work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I just would like to respond to a couple of things. First of all, we all represent all of the members of the community. So, we have a responsibility to the entire community. Right. And that means that we have to do what is right for the entire community. We have to be able to explain to people what's the infrastructure like if we put in all of these, if we, put on all of these units. We have not explained any of that to residents. How many meetings have we had that we have looked at some of this information? Do you know?
Do you know?
I'm asking you.
Oh, I mean, we'd have to go back and count it. I can think of four. I can think of four off the bat.
A handful.
In the last couple of months.
To Mr. Zoll's point, if supposedly we've known about this forever, we're talking about it for 4 meetings and we don't even have all the information.
Well, just in response to the question, that's in the last couple of months. We had meetings about this prior to the last 4 months as well. So if you go back over the full stretch, it's much more than just 4, but just in terms of the number of meetings.
But in terms of getting, consultants in, the planning board has consultants in looking at some of this stuff. And we have a little bit of time. I don't understand why we wouldn't let the planning board process play out. I'm sure that they will have a they could do their own article and then bring it to us. Isn't that usually the process on something like this? I know you said it can be either way, and I know Ms. Bradley's shaking her head no. But I think that it's, again, I think that you are not being, letting the planning board do their work and Mr. Chewinski do his work. We are hurrying up to get something out, and we want to make sure it's right. You know, once you get this out, it's out. And I think to Mr. Zoll's point about developers, this is a developer's dream. I know a lot of people that do development in different communities, in different towns. They love this law because they will go in and they will buy houses, and they will buy 1 or 2 houses, and they'll make several affordable, not even affordable units, multifamily units by right. So to say that, you know, we're going to get hit by developers like this. They love this. You should ask some of the communities that have something similar what's going on. Brookline, for instance, they are looking at doing it a little differently. They worked in it for how long, Mr. Milano? For a year or 2 on their
That's right.
Yeah, and they're in the same category as us for one of the 12 communities. And they're doing something a little creative with what they're doing, correct? They're not coming up with actually 7,000 new units. They're doing something creative. I think that we need to let the process play out a little bit longer. And I think that for us to be putting this forward, I disagree with.
So we're getting a little bit of far afield from the
I don't think
role.
that's our role. I don't think it's our role.
Yes, fair enough, fair
Okay.
enough. And
In
we
this
can have
instance.
a discussion. We do have on the agenda discussion of an article, so we can have
Sure.
a substantive discussion. Ms. Bradley.
Thank you so much. I want to address the Select Board's role regarding the MBTA Communities Act and our role in general. I'm having the wonderful pleasure of reading constitutional law right now as part of my schooling, and I had the proudest moment this past week of my son taking the oath of office to be a member of the Youth Task Force. In that oath, that he had to take as a minor, he stated that he would not only uphold the bylaws of our town, but he would follow state laws as are regulated. And I'm kind of in this black and white space right now where on August 22nd, there was a motion by this board whether or not to comply with state law. It wasn't about the guidance, it wasn't about fiduciary stuff, it wasn't about anything except for compliance with current state law. And that current state law requires us to have something by the end of this year. And that's a requirement of state law. And 2 people of this board voted against complying with state law. And to me, as somebody who is really grappling with how we're going about this, I think there is a lot of double talk and over talk about what actually our roles are. And our role is to comply. Period. End of sentence. What that looks like on the end of this, when it's all said and done, is not going to be the same article that the planning board puts forth, that we put forth. Things will change on the state level. We see this all the time. And I just want to say that I really strongly feel like there is a lack of respect to the state, to our legislators, to our governor, to our attorney general, who is working to try and solve a problem here that is a statewide problem. And I will be voting to uphold not only our town bylaws, which I feel like we are doing by proposing an article, it's within our role. I will also be upholding what we all swore to do, which is uphold the laws of this state. This is a law, we may not like it, we can try and, this is the great part about it right now, we get to try and massage it to the best of our ability so that it's in the greatest impact for our residents. It's not about being for or against it, it's about how do we massage this so that we can get all we want out of it as a town of Milton, because honestly, we have an obligation to comply with state law right now. And there's no other way around that. So I personally am offended that 2 members of our board voted not to comply with the state. 2 weeks ago. I've been really wrestling with that. And I especially wrestled with it when I watched, a young, impressionable person take an oath of office that they were supposed to uphold those laws. So I suggest we all work together and try and massage the best possible article we can to propose at town meeting in December, because that's the law, period. Thank you.
Other comments, questions?
I'm all set.
Ms. Musk.
No, that's fine.
Oh, Mr. Wells, Mr. Wells.
Let Mr. Wells go.
Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to comment, but my concerns are not, I have no concerns with our legal authority. I have none of that at all. And I don't like voting no on things. And as far as upholding the law, I think my life, my resume, and my record clearly illustrate that I've dedicated my entire life to upholding, enforcing, and protecting the law and the residents, not just of Milton, but the Commonwealth. And I continue to do that today. My only concern on this, and I've echoed this, and this isn't 440, and you're right, Michael, we took a vote on 440. This isn't 440. This is something much more significant. To Mr. Zoll's point, we didn't have years. This is one of the final endeavors of the Baker administration. It was inherited by the Healy administration, and Governor Healy is still in her first year, so there hasn't been years to deal with this. But to Mr. Zoll's point that he talked earlier about, just when he talked about the intersection of Randolph and Chick and how a roundabout there might impact traffic in the rest of the town, my concern here is our infrastructure. I don't like being anti-something, and I'm not, but when someone says 2,700 units, and Michael, you and I are the only two on this board that have been involved in every single 40B that's been before the town, from Falcone to all the Tamposi projects to 711 Randolph Avenue to the Ice House, every single one of them. We two of us know just the things that are associated with that. Traffic, infrastructure. I mean, look at how hard it was just to try and get a piece of land to build a school. So those are the concerns I have. And then my final concern is this. It does not look good for members of this board to be taking shots at other board. I don't like that. It's just not conducive to how we should be functioning. In my 7 years here, we've never done anything like that, and suddenly I'm hearing it. And I really think we need to stop that, and we need to work harmoniously with the planning board. This is my final comment. Part of the reason I vote no is because I'm uncomfortable in this lane. I'm uncomfortable in the lane because I understand the infrastructure threats that we deal with today, as far as traffic, airplane noise, lack of parks and recreation area, inability to build a new school, what's 2,700 units. This isn't as simple as 40B, as I just mentioned earlier. We dealt with 40B. The last 2 years, we addressed a lot of what was lacking for the past 20 years. But this is a lot bigger than, and that is the reason why. I voted no because in conscience, when you say to me 2,700 units and the town planner himself, and I asked him to illustrate to me what certain streets along that corridor would look like 10 or 20 years from now, I could not help but take pause in that, because that changes the complexion of this community, not in a positive way in the future. And that was my concern. So to the comments about massaging this and trying to do this in the best way and perhaps getting us reclassified, I'm for that. And that's really all I have to say about this. I agree with you 100% as far as our legal ability, absolutely. But I don't think it's the way we're going this right now. Two boards going two different ways. I think it'd be much more conducive for our residents that everybody's talking about to come together, talk about this, and do this collectively. Thank you.
Well, I'll say I actually don't think you have two boards going in two different ways. I think you have, collaboration.
When you're reading comments in the paper,
if I may, I think you have this board can't have a collaboration unless at least one board makes its views known. And so I think you have this board making its views known. I think you have this board collaborating with the planning board on classification. At least, there was planning board wanted to have a letter advocating classification for reclassification. We prepared a letter and sent a letter advocating for reclassification. Then the planning board changed their mind, and that's fine. They're entitled to do that. But I think we've had collaboration with our friends on the planning board, and I'm sure that'll continue as we move forward in the next few months. I'm sure it'll continue. So, Mr. Zoll.
I'd just like to maybe recommend, it seems like we're now sort of easing into item 7, so maybe we should, unless there's further discussion on the role of the select board itself, that we move to Article 7.
Is that acceptable to everyone? So we'll go to item 7, which is discussion approval of warrant articles for the December 4th, 2023 special town meeting. And the first of the 4 that we have listed is the zoning bylaw for compliance with MGL Chapter 40, Section 3A, which is the commonly known as the MBTA Communities Act, and we have a draft bylaw. I'm sorry, a draft article for the warrant and for consideration. So, question on Mr. Zoll.
Yeah, first, I'd like to just start my comments by acknowledging the incredible work of Tim Zerwinski and all of the folks in town, Nick, to put this together. I think they've really done heroic work. I think nobody should question their commitment to the town or to this work, or the amount of effort and labor that they've put in to this work. I saw Tim at Town Hall today, and I just told him again, I think somebody needs to tell him every day how appreciative we are of all that he does for this town, in making sure that, to Ms. Bradley's point, that we are following state law. I have looked through this article. We've, I think, all probably looked through it. We've got the most recent edits, which I don't think were substantive at all. We were just putting in notes about height in terms of feet. So sort of specifying if something was 3.5 stories, what does that mean in feet, and then putting in open space percentages. I don't think this is, again, a rush job by any stretch of the imagination. You can look through this article and see how well written it is. So I'm going to be voting in favor of this article. I think, again, to raise this point that Ms. Bradley said earlier, I'm certain that this will not be the word-for-word article that gets passed in December. I will buy anybody a steak dinner, and I will eat one too, and I don't like steak. If this is exactly the thing that gets passed through town meeting. That said, I think that it's positive, and I think just to go back to an earlier point, nobody's saying that developers aren't excited about this idea of being able to build more housing in transit-heavy areas. What we're doing is giving them guidelines through this article. If we don't give them guidelines, they will have free rein to do what they want in this area. And again, if you think that I'm wrong, we have seen this act play out before with our affordable housing in this town, which is still insubstantial, not enough. And again, we'll buy someone a steak dinner. I hope that it won't have to come to that. If we fail to pass this and developers aren't immediately moving into the transit area, buying up properties and putting up buildings that are way out of compliance, that don't have the thoughtful guidelines that try to keep the town, the town's character together. And just a couple of final comments that I want to make. We have multifamily housing in this town, and we've had it for some time. I've lived in multifamily housing in this town. I don't know that anybody else on this board has done that, but I've lived in an apartment on Brook Road for a couple of years in a two-family home. I have found some of the language directed at multifamily or denser housing to be distasteful at best. I think other adjectives could be used, which I won't use. But the idea that this is dirty, or that this is somehow will diminish the town, or that it will dramatically change the character. There are a lot of really great people in this town that live in multifamily housing. There are going to be more families that are living in multifamily housing in the future. I think that's great. I think we should be celebrating this article. I think we should be excited about it. I think, yes, it represents some change, but it does not represent the sort of dramatic whole-scale change that, again, opponents are trying to tell us that we're going to see. We don't see 2,600 new units in this article. We see units that are being zoned on top of existing units, which is the sort of alternative path that was suggested that Brookline is taking. We're doing the same thing. We're zoning on top of existing housing. So we're not going to see the number of new housing that people are saying that we're going to see. We're also not going to see it all happen at once. We're not, as Mr. Zawinski pointed out in one of the many, and I can't point to the specific one because we've had a lot of different hearings on this, but in one of the hearings that we've had on this, Mr. Zawinski pointed out that we still haven't even built out all of the housing zoning for housing that was done in the 1930s in this town. So the idea that we're going to suddenly have a flood of new development overnight is just, it's not true. And so I'm going to conclude my remarks. I don't really want to have a long debate about this, so I don't know that I'll be making another comment about it, other than to say this is fantastic work. I look forward to hearing the planning board's thoughtful comments on this and suggestions if they have them. And again, I look forward to buying somebody a steak dinner if this is the exact thing that gets passed in December. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I do have a couple of things I'd like to say. The first one is I have to go back to something that was said by Ms. Bradley, stating that I was one of the people that was not obeying the law. I am trying to obey the law. The law is different than the guidelines. The law was voted on by the legislature, which says talking about at least one district of multifamily housing by right. We had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to send a letter to the MBTA, and the letter was completely changed. The letter did not talk about reclassification. It talked about fixing up the line, basically, and give us an explanation of the category that we're in. We are not being treated fairly by the T in terms of this classification. We are rushing to get an article in by December. The planning board is working on this themselves. Why can't we allow the planning board to come up with the article and then send it to us? This is September, what, 5th, 6th?
5th.
5th, thank you.
My daughter's birthday. Happy birthday, Ida.
So, there is still a little bit of time here. They have their consultants in. We're lacking a lot of information still. We have some information, which is great, but we're lacking some. And if we're talking about collaboration and working cohesively and together, we have a lot of things on our plate, and we do represent the residents in this town. Planning board has been working on this, and they have the consultants in, they have been working diligently with Tim. I think it's not the right thing to do. I don't think this is the right process. Thank you.
I will just say, and again, this letter thing keeps coming up, and you can say a letter doesn't say what it says over and over again, but it doesn't make it any more accurate the last time you said it than it was the first time you said it. Just so everyone's clear, what the letter said before that everyone thought was great, and after was the significant differences in service, infrastructure, and equipment demonstrate that the Mattapan trolley line is not equivalent to the rapid transit lines, and that its previous classification as not being rapid transit should be restored. And then, again, no changes to, while the short self-contained Mattapan trolley line loop runs on a designated right-of-way in its current state, its operation is more equivalent to a bus or a streetcar system than to a rapid transit line in the following ways. And they laid out the same three arguments that were in the first draft and the prior letter. So again, the letter advocates for reclassification. I think it says it does, so it does. Just want to clear that up. So Ms. Musto.
I disagree with you respectfully on that. I think it does not ask for that, and it takes out the history, which the history is the most important part in that letter. You yourself helped write the original letter.
I wrote the original letter.
Well, with who?
With Nick. Nick
Okay.
did the first draft,
And-
but I mean, I think.
And
it's
who
fair
else
to-
sat in there with you? Who else worked on that letter?
What's that?
I thought you collaborated with the planning board on that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that being said.
And it was a great collaboration.
So if you had thought that there were things that were lacking in that letter, you would have put them in that letter in the first place. But instead, we had a gentleman on our board who was not in favor of reclassification, who wrote a totally different letter. It's like reading two different books, Mike.
Okay, well,
and we're not going to go there anymore.
We're getting a little off track.
Well, no, because you're talking about this whole zoning article, and I think that, had the letter been the first letter, maybe we would have had a different response by the T. We don't have a response yet, do we?
That was my question.
But no, but perhaps we may have, or maybe we would get a different response. We don't know.
Again, and that's fine. Look, you can say over and over again, the letter doesn't say what it says.
Well, it's like reading two books with two different endings. Thank you.
That's fine,
If I
Mr.
may.
Zoll. Mr. Zoll.
Just a quick point. That's what compromise looks like, Ms. Musto. This is what compromise looks like. I thought sending a letter was a bad idea. I still think it's a bad idea. I'm not surprised that we haven't gotten a response. I don't think we would have gotten a response to the other letter. I made some changes to the letter that I felt better encapsulated our argument by making it more contemporary. If you're familiar, and I said this when we discussed it before, but I'll say it again because I don't think we can say this enough in this country. If you're familiar with the history of Massachusetts, the United States, the world, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, decisions were made around infrastructure that were based in racism. Structural racism shaped this area just as much as it shaped every other area. And relying on decisions that were made that were rooted in structural racism in the 1960s, yes, I know that some people are not going to be happy to hear me say this, it's true, relying on those decisions to make a case about rapid transit in the 2020s is a really nasty look. And so I felt, like many others, that you could use all of the recent history of the MBTA's failure to update the Mattapan high-speed line. Again, you could use the argument that those failures are rooted in structural racism. You can use those and make the same point without bringing up the fact that there was an effort in this town to, that was rooted in these same problems that were evidenced everywhere. And people have asked me, if Milton is racist, then why did you move to Milton? And everywhere was racist in the 1960s. Everywhere. I grew up in Ohio. Ohio was super racist in the 1960s. It was racist in the 80s when I grew up. I remember there was a Klan rally in Toledo, Ohio. And I was asking my dad, like, what the heck is going on here? Because this is not something that I'm used to seeing. Structural racism exists, and to pretend that it didn't exist or to use structural racism decisions from the 1960s as a way to justify us not being a rapid transit community in the 2020s is a really nasty look. And I didn't think it was a good look for Milton, and that's why I took that stuff out. I didn't do it because I felt like it would undermine the arguments. I did it because I felt like leaving it in undermined the argument because it emphasized that we were drawing on this pretty sordid history of infrastructure developments in the 1960s to make a case in the 2020s.
And just to clarify, it was a very minor.
It was a
very
small,
minor thing. But anyway, Ms. Bradley and then Mr. Wells.
I just wanted to come back to where we are,
Thank
which
you.
is, no problems, which is I personally, 2 weeks ago, heard from the consultants and from Mr. Zawinski and from our town administrator, Mr. Milano, and I just want to say kudos to all of you for creating an article, proposed article for our warrant. It's very in-depth. It is multiple pages long. It follows everything that the letter of the law asked us to follow. I want to thank you both and everybody else who was involved in this. I don't know everybody behind the scenes that was working on this, but I just wanted to say thank you to everybody and to move this discussion along, because I know that we can have discussion after I make this motion, is that I'm going to make a motion to, hold 1 second, I got to find it. I'm going to make a motion to submit the zoning bylaw amendment for compliance with the Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 3A, multifamily zoning as of right in MBTA communities to the planning board.
I'll second.
Motion's been
Thank
made
you.
and seconded. I'll add a friendly amendment.
Please.
Just, after the word move, to say include on the special town meeting warrant.
Thank you.
And to submit.
To include on the special town meeting warrant, and I approve that. You're
As a
good.
friendly amendment, I approved it.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zoll, I don't want to, I just listened to you intently, and having grown up in this community, my parents moving here from Dorchester and renting an apartment and raising us here, and my 5 brothers and us, all of us in public service. I don't think I grew up in a racist community. Believe me, I know what racism is. I've run around this world. But you just uttered a pretty wide swath of a brush, is that everyone in this community that grew up here in the 60s
That's not what I said, Mr. Wells.
Listen, I'm sitting here listening intently, and I can't believe what I'm hearing you say, so maybe you better look back at what you said.
Well, I
So
can
to
tell
that-
you what I said.
I'm not going to debate it with you. I
Maybe
don't
you
want to
should
debate
come
with
in
you
here so we
because
can have a
Mr. Zoll,
discussion.
I don't wanna-
No, Mr. Zoll, let Mr. Wells finish, please.
I'm just telling you. I'm listening to you. No one's denying the racism, systematic racism did not exist and does not continue to exist in this country. I've never seen or heard of a Ku Klux Klan rally anywhere near the town of Milton. As a matter of fact, the only one that I ever witnessed was when I was a rookie in the police academy in the 1980s, and it happened in City Hall Plaza. And they were beaten out of this community faster. The police couldn't even provide enough protection for them. They couldn't walk 50 feet across City Hall Plaza. So people listen to what we say, and they listen to what we do. That was pretty, I sat there listening, and it almost sounded like it was an attack on anyone who lived or had anything to do with this town in the 1960s. My father was a policeman in the 1960s. He rode that train to work every day from Hyde Park because they didn't have enough money. They didn't make enough money to even have cruises. The police station was on Central Ave. So, and I don't view my father as being a racist, so, nor many of the others, or any of the others. So just, please, in the future, I take your passion, but I understand people have their concerns, good or bad, and I'm with it. I am going to vote for this because I do think this needs to go to town meeting. I think it needs to go to the planning board, and whoever massages it to get it to the best thing that it can be for the future and the protection of this community as it exists and will exist, and protecting all the things that people love about it, I'm fine with. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Zoll.
Mr. Wells, thank you. And it's possible that some of my remarks aren't, over online aren't as good as if you were here in person. So I hope to see you back here soon because we've been missing you here. I just want to say that I absolutely did not call everyone in Milton in the 1960s a racist. I simply made the point that America was racist in the 1960s. America continues to have problems with racism. We've had swastikas put up in graffiti in the middle school very recently, and that's racism. So the idea that we have somehow cured racism and that there's no racism that exists in Milton, I think is preposterous. I think everybody would laugh at that. And I kind of resent the idea that you are putting words in my mouth of saying that everybody that grew up in Milton in the 1960s was racist. I never said that. I said structural racism is a big problem and we still need to continue to address it and acknowledge it, and I'm just doing that. And if you take that as a personal attack on yourself or your father, I'm very sorry for that. I obviously did not level any personal attacks against anyone. I simply acknowledge the fact that any sort of systematic infrastructure or zoning decisions that were being made in the 1960s had acknowledged, conscious or unconscious, racism built into them. And so our job now in the 2020s is to make sure that we have clear eyes when we look at those decisions and that we continue to move forward as a town to combat structural racism, whether that's graffiti in Pierce or whether that's zoning decisions that need to be made for the town. That's all I had to say. And Richard, again, I'm very sorry if you took personal offense at that. That was never my intent. And I think everybody who knows me knows that I'm not the sort of person to sit here and level broadside personal attacks against anybody in a public forum.
And perhaps just some miscommunication from two very well-intentioned members. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sure that's fine. I will just say along the lines of what Richard said on the substance of the article. You know, if we vote to include an article and submit it to the planning board tonight, that gives our friends on the planning board the maximum amount of time that they can have under the statute. Because the statute, Chapter 48, Section 5, gives the planning board 65 days to have a public hearing. They may not use the entire time, and hopefully they won't, because we want to hear from them. And then it gives them, after a public hearing, 21 days to do a report. So if we vote in favor of an article tonight and submit it to the planning board, that gives the planning board the maximum amount of time that they could have to weigh in this and offer amendments and massage it and improve it, as I'm sure they will, through all their diligence and hard work. And so I think it is responsible for us to give the planning board the opportunity to have the maximum amount of time that they can under statute, which, and if you count the days from tonight to December 4th, it's pretty close to give them the maximum amount of time. So again, they may not take it all, and we hope to have any report prior to the maximum amount of time, but this gives them the maximum amount of time to make amendments, to make changes, and to offer whatever they get in their diligence and in their well thought out approach. And so I think this gives us a good a good starting point for an article. It gives us an article to ensure that town meeting will be able to make a decision on December 4th, and it gives our friends on the planning board the maximum amount of time to make any amendments or changes or thoughts that they may have. So I think it's important for that reason to go ahead and approve this very well thought out and well drafted article that as I understand it, includes what the planning board has offered thus far on this, and hopefully they'll make improvements, as I suspect they will. Ms. Musto.
Thank you. My question would be, why couldn't the planning board do the article themselves and start it at that level and generate it back to us once they've completed the article?
It's because of the statute. So the statute gives the planning board 65 days to have a public hearing. That's required by statute prior to town meeting, and then it gives the planning board 21 days to do a report prior to town meeting, again, required by statute. We're not required to do a report or have a public hearing on it. This planning board is. So this gives the planning board the opportunity to have that maximum amount of time under statute. So you know, could we just wait and have the planning board do something? That's one way to go, but this is a way to go as well. So, Ms. Musto.
Follow up. I guess my question would be, since Tim worked on this, couldn't he generate it at the planning board level, and then they work on it there, and then it comes back to us in a form that they've all vetted and that they've had hearings on? I mean, we're originating the article, but couldn't it have been that Tim worked with the planning board to originate the article, worked on it and had a hearing, and then we approve it or don't approve it? I mean, that to me seemed like the right process on this particular article. And I'm wondering, Mr. Milano, has that happened at all? Has Tim been working with the planning board on an article, or why not generate it at that level versus this level?
That is, as Mr. Zulus pointed out, that is certainly possible, and he has obviously been at all the planning board meetings where they've discussed this and working with their consultants to offer tweaks to the districts that we've talked about, which are all incorporated in the article put together here. And that still could be the result here, where the planning board arrives at an article that the select board feels is better suited to meeting compliance with MBTA Communities Act, and maybe replaces this one, or they take this one and make the suggestions that they want, and that becomes what goes to town meeting. So it's all you know, up for discussion as we go here. This doesn't lock anything in stone.
Yeah, I mean, and I will add to that. That's, as I said, this gives the planning board appropriate time to make any changes to this, the planning board could come up with their own article, and we as a board could decide to pull this article and use a subsequent article. That's a possibility as well. But this gives us this ensures that we'll have something for town meeting. Ms. Bradley.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. To that point, I have been lucky enough to be watching the last few planning board meetings as my classes get out at 8 o'clock, so I tune in right away to the planning board meetings. I have yet to see that they've asked Mr. Zawinski for a proposal of an article. I've yet to see them actually do an article or request anything like that. So at our last meeting on the 22nd, we actually voted to ask Mr. Zawinski to produce exactly what he produced. That was our recommendation. Granted, it was a split vote, but we asked him to do this. I don't recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not recall the planning board actually asking Mr. Zawinski to draft any article for consideration. So in my opinion, we are in fact doing our due diligence to our neighbors and to our residents of the town to comply by the end of this calendar year with state law. So that's where I'm constantly landing on, is state law.
Ms. Musto.
Follow up. The planning board, are they meeting this week? I guess my question would be, could we send a memo to them asking them to have Tim work on it? Maybe he takes this and he adjusts it and works with the planning board on it. But I mean, I think for us to sit here and vote to do it that way, I'm looking at the process, and I would rather that this type of an article come generated from the planning board, and maybe it is a lot of the bones of this, right? If they're meeting this week, perhaps there can be some discussion about that. We're meeting every week in September, right? So, I mean, whether, I guess my question is maybe we direct Tim to go back to the planning board, or Mr. Villano does actually, and have him maybe take something like this and work on it. But again, we're directing the planning board, this is the article we want you to work on. Here you go. Is basically what you're saying. We want this article. If you want to adjust it, you can, but we're generating it. And I guess that's my problem. I don't know that we should be the ones generating it.
So let me try to suggest we are we would be voting to put an article on the warrant and to submit it to the planning board. And the planning board has 65 days. They're supposed to have a hearing, and then they have 21 days to have a report on it. And that will allow them to do all that prior to town meeting. They could come in with amendments to this article, right, in their process, in that public hearing process, and in the report, they could offer amendments to this article that we could consider and change. Or, as I mentioned before, they could proffer their own article for us to include in the warrant, and then we could decide, well, we'll pull this article and include that article. So those are all possibilities, depending on what the planning board wants to do and depending on what they decide to do. But this ensures that town meeting will have an article that the planning board has time to vet prior to December 4th. And that's why, again, that's why I think it ensures that by statute. And that's what's really important, is the statute, to me, the timing of the statute. Ms. Musto.
So what you're saying then is that basically that the planning board won't get it done in time, is what you're implying.
No,
because they could do this themselves and then have the hearing and do the whole process and have it come to us for an okay.
Not any implication of that at all. Not any suggestion of that at all. Not the case at all. What I'm saying is what I'm saying, which is, if we submit an article, then the planning board, our friends there, will have the maximum amount of time provided by the statute to do whatever they want with it or with something else. Mr. Wells.
Mr. Chair, as the great Mr. Warren Buffett always says, time is our greatest utility.
Yeah.
I think we should move the vote. I do agree. I think that, as Mr. Zoll said, and I have Ms. Musto's comments, this is what is going is, I agree 1,000%, this is not what's going to wind up at town meetings. So if this gives them time, this sends this to them to massage it, whatever they need to do to get the best possible outcome for this community, let's vote.
All right, any further discussion? Motion's been made and seconded with a friendly amendment. All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
I'll abstain.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zoll is yes. Okay. 4B is discussion approval of another proposed article for town meeting, and that is our bylaw to require recording and posting of elected public bodies, and we have a draft article on that. And I don't know if Mr. Milano needs to add anything to this prior to a discussion of this.
So no, not really. I pulled together a draft. Just really the only other examples that we could find of these were all citizens petitions in other communities. So we are kind of starting from scratch here. So what you see is an initial rough draft. I'm open for all comments. Obviously, we will want to follow up with town council to have them take a look at it once kind of some of the policy decisions behind it are made. And I did reach out to the other elected public bodies who aren't presently being recorded, asked them for some feedback. I got some questions about technology, and I'm awaiting other feedback as well from the other elected public bodies that this may impact. And I did email it to Ms. Milbauer, and she provided some comments as well that I do have for review.
Comments or questions from the members? Ms. Bradley?
Go ahead.
Ms. Bradley.
I was just going to say that there's nothing wrong with being the first in the state to do something. We're often the first in the country to do something, so I'm really excited to be the first of 351 to do something. So therefore, I'm going to move to approve the bylaw to require recording and posting of elected public bodies and request the town council to review and put into proper legal form.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Ms. Musto?
I had a question, and I think I brought this up last time. If we're going to do this for elected bodies, I'm wondering why we wouldn't consider doing this for committees or subcommittees that one of us sit on, because we are elected and we're sitting on a subcommittee. I think that's important just as well. So, I think that, if you're looking at just elected bodies, that's one thing, but you're looking at us as elected officials, and if we're elected members of subcommittees, I think that should considerably possibly be in this as well.
Ms. Bradley?
Thanks so much. I'm thinking about the Finance Committee in response to that, Ms. Musto, and I believe that our Finance Committee is recorded, and it's actually uploaded to Mr. Fundling's podcast. So I guess I don't know that there's enough technology for us to do it for I honestly don't know, and I don't know that that's in our best interest. I mean, it's a subcommittee that has to report back to an elected board. So for me, I would think that all subcommittees should be reporting back to the elected board that made them.
Mr. Wells, but let me just offer one thing, and that is we're talking about the Board of Assessors, Board of Health, Board of Parks Commissioners, Library Trustees, Planning Board, School Committee, Trustees of the Cemetery and Select Board.
Yep.
There's a multiplier effect if you include all of the subcommittees of all of those boards, and that may be difficult to administer. But that's a thought that I have. Mr. Wells.
So you just took the words right out of my mouth. Remember, subcommittees aren't staffed. Most of the elected committees are all staffed.
Right.
That way, you have someone responsible for recording the meetings, archiving, making sure they get posted. Subcommittees, they're not staffed. A lot of them aren't staffed. And then who are you going to put that on? You're going to put it on the subcommittee chairs. A lot of these are just volunteers who are going to now have to be responsible for recording a committee. Who they're going to give it to. I think we want to walk before we run. So I'm comfortable with it as it's written now. And if a year or so or a couple of years down the road, technology becomes that advanced that that's something we could do, then we could do it. But I think to try and do that all right now in one big swoop, we're bound to fall into some type of sinkhole here. So I'd be inclined to just go with it as it is.
Ms. Musto.
Mr. Milano, so are any other communities, no other communities in the state are doing that? What are they doing?
There are 3 communities that have had, 3 towns, I should say, that have had warrant articles approved by their town meeting and approved by the Attorney General for recordings, and there have been citizens petitions requiring recordings of all board and committee meetings. So all appointed or elected boards or committees. One went into effect, and I know that community's been struggling in terms of capacity and technology and staffing questions. So those are the examples that I'm aware of presently.
Do you know what communities those are?
Yeah, that's,
I have the list. I can follow up with the list.
Okay.
Colin pulled the information. I just have to. I don't have it. I don't have it in front of me. Hanover, I think, was one. And
I know
don't wanna
that-
throw other names out there.
I know that, so, the only thing, like, I wonder, like, sometimes we've had problems even here with people being able to hear everything that we say, and so I'm just wondering, you know, like, we could, obviously, all the communities will do their best, right? But there are going to be some instances of issues around the technology, too.
Right. I think that's something, and in the way I've crafted and written it is that they're kind of held not liable, and they can have their meeting even if there are some issues. I got a comment today that perhaps they should be asked to then just take out a phone and try to record it on their phone, which we can talk through as a potential solution. But right now, as it's written, it just says the meeting can go forward, but they'll make every effort to have it recorded.
Mr. Zoll.
I think we're probably about ready to go to a vote on this, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, though, I think to echo Ms. Bradley's point, I think that it's fantastic that we as a town, and I thank Ms. Milbauer for her initiative for putting this forward, but as a town, you know, working towards more transparency is always a good thing. I appreciate Ms. Musto's, you know, sentiment about thinking about how this might be more broadly applied, and I agree with Mr. Wells. Like, let's walk first, and then we can run. But I think, as evidenced by Mr. Milano's comments about what else is happening in the Commonwealth, we should be proud of Milton as being a leader in this movement. So I'm looking forward to voting yes on this.
So the motion is to request town council to review and put in the proper legal form. I would just offer one thing. When it says, and this town council may want to weigh in on in the review of this, all recordings shall be made publicly available within 1 week of the meeting date. Seems to me that's
Pretty quick.
A bit onerous to be in a bylaw. I see Ms. Milbauer raising her hand. At the risk of engaging in conversation, is there something that you had on that point, or? Yeah, very quickly, if you, yeah.
So very quickly, Milton Access TV told me that once it's in the Zoom account, within a couple of days, he said they can post it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. My comment is if there's a technological problem, if it's too much of a tax on the system, I just think there should be some leeway there in mandating it made in a bylaw. So that's something.
Maybe
as we
prior to their next meeting, it should be posted.
Yeah, as we send something to town council, yeah, we can
Okay.
maybe get a suggestion.
Sure.
Maybe Ms. Milbauer can make a suggestion, or we can, as we get an article drafted for our consideration. So, okay. Mr. Wells.
I just want to say, I think that's agreeable. I think we should have town council. I know in the ideal world, things can be done, but you're correct. Technology, anything can happen. That's what I worry about, even being able, if it collapses, and do you still hold the meeting if you don't have the Zoom capability, if you don't have the taping capability? So I'd be more comfortable with town council looking at that as far as the reasonableness of it.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded to send it to town council. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Okay, 4C, transfer of land to the Conservation Commission. We have an article drafted there. Mr. Milano, what's the status of this draft article?
Sure. This article pulls in the request that was discussed in our prior meeting with Mr. Doyle and Chair Kiernan. I did include a map just to give folks, because the map and parcel IDs are a little tricky. So what we're talking about here, and on the first colored map, is G5610, 9, 7, 8, and G57-3. Those are the pieces of land that they were asking for be transferred from Select Board to Conservation Commission control. They were both taken by eminent domain in the 1960s for, I believe it was 60s, might have been 1950s, but both were taken for preservation of open space and natural resources. G5611, which is in the same area, a large parcel abutting them, was taken by the town through the tax title process, so is in Select Board's property. That piece has been transferred to the Conservation Commission already. So we had done a little bit more research. I just wanted to share that with the board. I did send this draft to Murphy Hussey through attorney Peter McNulty, who looks at all of our real estate stuff. Asked him to take a look at it and provide any feedback or suggestions on the article, and I'm waiting that now.
Okay, so we haven't heard back, we haven't had town council's feedback
Correct.
on this. Okay, so do we want to, well, I guess, do we want to give it another week until we
I
get
anticipate
back?
by the 12th, I should have more information.
Okay, is that
That sounds
acceptable?
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll defer on C. Item D is the local historic district article. Mr. Milano, what's the we have a draft with some draft, I guess, of an
Yes.
article. Mr.
The-
Milano.
The Local Historic District Study Committee has been working on a local historic district report, as well as a potential bylaw, which has been included in your packet. Mr. Lawfer provided the information at the end of August. He is requesting that this be included on the December town meeting. The way this process works is that the Historic District Study Committee has to do a report. They worked on that. They sent it to Mass Historical earlier this year, and Mass Historical Commission, who has to review it, sent it back with comments, looking for additional information. That was resubmitted to Mass Historical Commission at the end of August. I believe it was the 22nd. After that point, Mass Historical has it for 60 days. They anticipate providing comments back in mid-September. At the same time, it was transmitted to the Planning Board, and the Planning Board has asked through this process to provide any comments as well. The other piece that has to happen is that there does have to be a public hearing on this, but this can't happen. The public hearing has to wait 60 days after the date it's sent to the state. So basically, the public hearing can't happen until the end of October, early November. So we're looking at a public hearing date first week in November, most likely. So
And
it's
that's a public hearing by the...
by the Local Historic District Study
Yep,
Committee.
yep.
So it's a tight timeline to get it ready for December. It's here. I just provided the information to you. I don't know if you want to look at it, and we can include it next week and reconvene on the topic, or how the board wants to proceed on it.
And certainly, we don't want to put any more pressure on the planning board prior to December. And we definitely want to hear, I think, from the planning board on it. Ms. Bradley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just have a quick question, Mr. Milano. Is this time sensitive? Does it have to happen in our December special town meeting, or can this wait until, and I do so hate to put more things on our regular town meeting, as those are usually booked pretty heavy, but I'm just, if there is a reason to get it done sooner, I'm more than happy to, pull up my bootstraps and make this happen, but I just am curious if that needs to happen.
My understanding is that we could go through this whole process and be ready for May, like that
Yep.
there's no trigger or deadline that the town meeting must act after the 60-day period or after the production of this report.
Okay.
I can have a conversation with Larry Lawfer about that and circle back with the board from there.
And if, Mr. Chair, if I can follow
Yeah,
up,
please.
if it's okay, I mean, obviously ask the local historic commission what they would like. I mean, I don't know. I just haven't heard what the rush is, and like Chair Zulus said, the last thing I want to do right now is put anything else on the planning board.
Understood.
Thank you.
Other comments on this? Do we want to defer on this and get more information, or?
Seems
Seems
like
like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
All
can
right,
follow up.
So we'll defer and see what we'll keep it on the list, and then
Okay.
see what we hear next week and the weeks to come. All right, that is it for Item 7. Item 8. Oh, item 8, discussion approval select board landing committee, Neponset River tour. And this is, I think, Mr. Wells or Mr. Milano. Mr. Wells, do you want to take this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as you will remember, I don't even know if Mr. Milano was here. He wasn't. The committee in 2021, as you know, was 6 years into working on this now. This is a committee that was formed as a result of the work for the MPIC. In 2022, working off an MAPC report where they had recommended dredging and a new ramp for the Milton Basin area. We came together, the committee came together with the City of Boston and the City of Quincy. When we looked at historically, the dredging operations that date back into the 1930s extended the entire river from Milton Landing, from actually the Baker Bridge all the way to Point Norfolk and Squantum Point Park, what is now known as Squantum Point Park in Quincy. We went to the Seaport Council and they gave the three of us a $50,000 grant to do dredging sounding in that entire area. But as you will remember, being on the board, the EPA came to us shortly after to advise that the upland portion of the river from High Park to Baker Dam had been placed on this EPA Superfund list. So Ty and Bond, who is the consultant for and the engineers for the Seaport Council in Massachusetts, was able to include not just dredging sampling, but to take soil samples of the entire river. And as those of you who've seen the report, we did our first tour in 2022 of the river with all the elected officials that would be, not electeds, but the representatives of the elected. So planning boards from all three towns, Concons, and DCR, even though none of this is on the DCR, but I think we had DCR as in a butter because of the bike path, and I can't remember who else was there. I think Save the Harbor, Save the Bay may have been present. But the river is seriously polluted, and it's going to be about a $27 or $30 million. Wish it was $27,000, $30 million cleanup. We have already started some preliminaries, Tim and Josh, with the EPA, and this is going to be the follow-up tour to let 2 points to let our elected officials see the report, see the hot spots, let Ty and Bond point out the plan for going forward, how they think it should be, but most importantly, to bring the EPA representatives that we're already working with to let them see it. As Mr. Zoll knows, he was on a walking tour that we took with Concon CPA committee last week. This is truly a jewel in all three communities, and you could stand there on that bank all day long or sit on the deck at Marjorie Asteria and look out and see how pretty it is and have no idea just how polluted and how endangered it is. From an environmental point of view, even though the cleanup is on the freshwater side, the real use, environmental impacts are on the saltwater side. The American eagles, the smelt, the striped bass, all those things, the canoeing, the kayaking, the rowing, the boating uses, all of that is where really grown and have really developed over the years in this section. So this is to get us to the next steps, which is really, as I've said before this board in the past, the big thing is to get the EPA to accept this and include the cleanup of this portion of this 2.2 mile portion of the river as part of the Superfund project and that is being done on the freshwater side. It's a major endeavor, and it's going to take longer than any of us that are on this board here now, but I don't think we can walk away from this for the generations to come in the future and for the environmental impact this area has on all three of the communities.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. So I'll just add, it seems like a very good follow-up, important to do to try to bring the communities together. We just need to figure out how to pay for it and, how the liability goes. And so
we may not have to, the last one we did, the city of Quincy provided 2 boats to do it. They will do that again. I'd really like to get do this, so they've given us a vendor that we could rent, we could pay for this out of the landing committee was like they're doing the new fence down there now. It's the landing fund allows anything for the enhancement or benefit of the landing or the Neponce River want to be paid. This won't be a big expense. I don't see it being more than $800 or $900 if we do 2 of them. It's really critical. It's a really small window when we can do this, like an hour before high tide to an hour after high tide, just given how shallow the river is. And the only thing I'd like to include in this one is that we've talked about, Tim, Josh, and I have talked about including the press. I think, and Karis and I talked a little about this as well in our discussions about trying to get this to EPA on board, is to let the citizens and the public know about this. So,
So
it may not be, it may be that we do it on municipal boats. We could do one Boston, one Quincy again, but I'd like to try and do it. The boat that Quincy has suggested holds 20 people. That way we can do 2 trips, 20 and 20, with maybe do it an hour each. And that's what I'm thinking about. There's a lot of logistics to make this happen because there are just so many complexities about going up and down that river now.
So just in terms of, we just want to make sure the funding is, if we approve the funding, that's appropriate. I think that fund is for repair and maintenance, and
No,
maybe we can find the funding elsewhere. Let me just ask Mr. Milano in terms of funding for this, and what's the best way to?
So it's kind of a unique, and I didn't realize this, it is, the revolving fund is set up differently than all of our other revolving funds, but the select board budget does have, if we're talking about less than $1,000, that is available if the board is okay with this. We can certainly tap into the select board budget or other town hall budgets as necessary to make it work if the landing committee is not. The landing committee revolving fund, for whatever reason, we don't think is right for this kind of a expenditure.
You think it'd be better from the select board budget?
Yeah, I think if the board is looking for us to find the money, we can find the money.
Ms. Brad.
Thanks so much, because I'm a bit confused.
Mm-hmm.
When you say the board, you mean this board?
Yes.
Not the landing committee board?
Correct.
Or the subcommittee?
Yes.
Of this committee. So I have been on this board now as long as Ms. Musto, which she's on this landing committee, so she knows a lot more than I do, and it's day to day. I've never once heard them report to the greater select board. I know, as being on the finance committee last year, we constantly reported to the select board to approve things, obviously, because it has to do with money. But I'm a bit just taken aback that this entire thing was being, according to our meeting on August 22nd, was actually being proposed and was going to happen without the select board even knowing about it. I have no idea about the greater good of the EPA. I'm all for cleaning out our waterways. I am all for all of that, except I have no knowledge of any of this right now. Nobody from the Milton Landing Committee has come to the select board and given any reports as of date since I've been on it. I literally have no idea half of what Mr. Wells has just been talking about. I'm curious to know why the select board has not been invited to be on this boat tour, and yet other municipalities have. I am extremely concerned that there seems to be no care or concern that we are all apprised of what's happening. The only thing I know about with the Milton Landing Committee is the Milton Yacht Club that many of our members of our town have come here to talk about. So I guess in due diligence and with respect to the population that I serve, which is our residents, I don't know what I'm voting on. And it's great that the select board has this revolving fund that we can spend up to $1,000 on this endeavor. But I'm also curious if that money is best spent doing this. I don't know. Mr. Chair Zulus has said that this is something that's important. That's great. I'm all for things that are important. What I'm not in favor of is just expecting that the select board is going to support things without any prior knowledge to them. And that goes across the board for any select board subcommittee that we currently have. I mean, the policy committee, even our subcommittee that Ms. Musto and I served on, we constantly came back and reported to the select board. And so I will be abstaining from this vote because I do not believe that there has been enough information provided to the select board at this time. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, other comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
I was just going to say, I don't know if Mr. Wells just wants to elaborate on anything, but I know that we have talked about it potentially being a super fund addition. I thought we talked about that at one of our meetings, our select board meeting, talking about that, about the super fund, that's going on from like Hyde Park, I think the Tillingston Dam, all the way down to near Baker Chocolate. And this is from Baker Chocolate down. So I thought that we had talked about this a little bit, unless I'm mistaken.
We've talked about the efforts in terms of raising this issue with EPA and making it a more of a forefront issue. And we have submitted a letter to the EPA from this board. I think that was in August. There was an August 10th deadline. So we submitted a letter with comments about their community input process, but raising everything south of or heading out to the saltwater side of the Neponset. We haven't talked, there hasn't been regular reports to the Landing Committee. We certainly can make that, include that as we go forward on the agendas after their meetings. If that's something the board's certainly looking for, we can do that. That's an easy fix.
Sorry.
Mr. Zoll and then Mr. Wells.
Sorry, Mr. Wells, I'll be brief. So just a couple of quick thoughts. Would it normally be the Landing Committee that would be responsible for EPA sort of advocacy in this regard?
It has been. We were the ones that invited the EPA to come before the board in the beginning.
Okay, but I'm just curious from like a town administrative perspective, is that I appreciate the initiative, Mr. Wells, but I'm just curious about is that where it would normally have sat, or?
This board advocated with the EPA for the Superfund status.
Okay, that's kind of what I was going at. And I think certainly, I mean, as Mr. Wells mentioned earlier, related to the earlier article on the saltwater marsh land, I don't think anybody can argue with the importance of the ecological importance of that land and securing federal funds to help secure it and clean it ideally. I guess I'm always just curious about what the sort of what would success metrics look like for this river tour. And maybe Mr. Wells, I'll turn it over to you because I'm just curious to know, like, from your perspective, how would if the river tour happens, and then what would you hope to see as a result of that river tour?
Mr. Wells.
So the first aspect of it is that you were, I guess I could say the same as what you saw from the walking tour that you took last week on this saltwater basin in the marsh with the Concon, is that, and I've said this before this again, I can't even think of how many times I've reported on issues here, to everything to getting the bylaw, getting it passed, to the purchase of the land from 88 Wharf, all of those, all endeavors of this committee, which have been all before the entire board. But I'm not going to belabor on this. So the purpose of this is, as I said, is a follow-up to it. We've already done this. We did this in 2021 just to bring awareness and to bring the Seaport Council to the table to see if they would listen to us. And they gave us a $50,000 grant immediately, and they were expecting from us a grant for up to $1 million this year, which is a direct result of the work that came from the MPIC and all the MAPC work that I was handed 7 years ago when we started this committee to dredge the entire basin. But when Ty and Bond found the pollution, that stopped everything. And the link to the pollution is the upstream contaminants that have flowed through the dam into the saltwater marsh for now over 50 years, maybe even 75 years. And so we need to have the EPA see it, understand it. We took the lead in this with Quincy and Boston from the beginning. We've been the lead agency in this from day one. Is to bring them all back to the table. They're expecting it. Ty and Bond is related to them. You've all seen the report. The report was sent to Mr. Milano and Tim Zawinski. If you haven't read it, I suggest you read it. It's over 25 pages long. If you don't want me to do this, I'll walk away from it. But we're 6 years into this endeavor, and as Mr. Zulis knows, this is a section of town that took 40 years of rent from a yacht club, left everything else to be an eyesore, did nothing to enhance anything there, but just to include the water and just let it rot. And this has been 6 years of hard work to try and bring some semblance of, as the woman Ms. Cox said, the ability of residents to gain access and use a clean, viable estuary known as the Ponce River Basin between Milton. We own only half of the river. Boston owns half of it. We don't have. The midline, the center of the river is the midline between the two communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wells. And I don't think anyone has suggested that you should walk away on this. I just, if we want to figure out what it's going to consist of, you know, how we're going to do it, how we're going to pay. And I think you've answered the question, how we're going to do it, how we think we're going to do it. I think there's a question of how best to pay for it, which Mr. Milano suggested maybe it should come out of our budget. And then beyond that, I just think some of the members want to know what it's going to consist of, who gets invited, you know, when it is, all of that stuff. Just make sure that everybody, the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. That's what it sounds.
Anyone from the board wants to go, I'll clearly have it posted for attendance. We did that last time, and the only other member who attended was Melinda attended. And
again, it'd be really, I think it'd be the board, you know, since if the board's paying for it, the board's doing it, but you know, I think it sounds like we would be delegating you to
again, I could do it in a way that we don't have to pay for it. I did it. The reason that I thought of chartering the boat and paying for it is to try and get everyone in 2 trips all together. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get as much exposure to this as we can possibly do, given what we know today. Yep. 6 years into this,
and it sounds like it's something that makes sense for the town to do. You know, as the board, for the board to do, and for you as the member, the representative of the board, maybe to be the, you know, delegated to do it on behalf of the board. So I think there's kind of consensus on this that we should do it subject to making sure we know
Just
what's going
more
on
information.
and get all the information, and then also figuring out the best way to pay for it.
And who's liable?
And who's liable? If we're chartering a boat, we got to make sure.
There's no liability. If we charter a boat, we charter a registered boat. There's no liability with it.
Well, but
it's no different. It's no different than renting a bus to go to school.
Right.
You know,
it's
no different.
We just need to make sure that we're covered under the town's insurance policy. That's all. That's all. And I'm sure that's the case, but we just need to make sure that in case the boat sinks, right? So.
So could we, but Mr. Chair, could I make a question about a motion? Could we make a motion where we approve, sort of preliminary approve this as a concept, and we ask Mr. Wells as serving as the point person on this, what was it called, tour? Now I've got. You said that liability thing. I just thought Gilligan's Island. I've been out there. I know that it can happen, but you know, it's not a 3-hour tour. It's just a 1-hour tour. So I think we'll be safe. But maybe we could make a motion to ask Mr. Wells to come back to the board here with a sort of a budget that we could look at and an idea of like maybe a list of recommended attendees. And I think certainly to the earlier point. That, you know, as the select board is sort of like the chief negotiator with the EPA on this sort of work, it would make sense to at least invite all of the select board members. Some of them may not want to join. I would be interested. But if we could ask Mr. Wells to come back, is that something that we could do?
Is it in terms of time sensitivity, Richard, is this something we could?
I'm looking for the week of the 11th, so we could. I mean, it may not be any money, because if I get municipal boats that can work, then we'll just have either Quincy or Boston do this for us, as we did last time. This just seemed, when this was suggested to me, this just seemed a more amenable thing. I know the press has asked many times during our meetings, could we ever get access to the river? We've been asked it before, and we did tell the abutters, which would be the yacht club, the Ponce Rowing Club, Adams Inn, on the Quincy side, the Ponset Valley Yacht Club. I think Boston has 2 abutters on their side, 2 or 3 abutters, that they would have a chance to go out and see this and have it explained to them, because I don't think anyone, to include myself, had any clue that this would wind up being as polluted as it is.
So in terms of the board, approving this, this activity and taking this action on behalf of the board and maybe paying for it, is this something that we could finalize on the 12th?
Yeah, because I want to do it by the 11th. So
that's a week from.
I don't know. We're next week, aren't we? Next week?
Yeah,
Next week is the 12th. So you want to do it on,
So yeah, let me look at next week. I haven't talked to him today. I'll know tomorrow. So I'll let Mr. Milano know tomorrow. I don't want to go too late, because then it just gets cold. I don't want to get into the fall. I'd like to get it done sooner versus later. We're waiting for the final report from Ty and Bond. We had the preliminary. We're waiting and waiting. Finally, they got it out last month, and Tim and Josh have been talking regularly with the EPA reps, and we all agreed. Committee discussed it at one of our meetings. We need to do this follow-up, and we definitely want to get them there to see it. They're just hearing things that we're telling them. They're reading a report. They've never got it. As Mr. Zoll saw, it's a totally different animal when you're out there and you're walking in the marsh, you're on the marsh, or riding in the river, than to just drive over the Royce C. Smith Bridge and look down.
So it sounds like this is something we could come to ground on next Tuesday, because no invitations have gone out. Nothing's really been planned yet. Sounds like Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I was just wondering, Richard, I know that you were thinking the week of the 11th, but what if it ended up being like the 12th or something? I'm wondering if maybe the board should...
It could be. I didn't look at next week's calendar. I'm out of town. I'm leaving on the 16th, and I'll be gone till the 25th, so that whole week is gone. I wanted to get it done before we get close to it. It's going to be October before you know it. And I may not need any money. And if I don't need any money, then I would convey that to Mr. Milano, and then I would just ask him to post for attendance for that.
So I guess my question is, could we preliminarily approve something like this, and he works out the details with Mr. Milano, and we get an email on it as to when it will be and so forth? Because I think it depends on the tides, correct?
Right. That's what he gave me. He was looking towards the end of that week as being the time. We don't want to do this in the dark. We want to do this either late afternoon or midday.
Yeah, we can't approve anything by email.
Well, no, if we can approve up to like a certain amount of money, and if it ends up being no money, then,
But
unless you can bring it in for next week.
But I guess, for next week, I think it'd be good to kind of know who's getting invited and who's inviting. Is it the select board inviting, or is it?
It's basically the representatives that were there originally, each community when we went to them. I think the only other ones that I included were the EPA reps and I think the press, the Times, Dorchester, one of the Dorchester reporter there, Quincy Patriot Ledger, and the Quincy Sun.
Mr. Zoll.
I do think it's an important point about so getting the list of who's being invited, and then also I think a formal invitation from the town probably makes the most sense to make this as official and as impactful as possible. Because all
the players are already at the table. I mean, they're already the representatives from each city in our town are already there. We already. Josh has the list. We already know who they are. We're not inviting Mayor Wu or Mayor Polk. It'll become too big. You just can't do it.
Okay.
I don't disagree with you, Mr. Wells. I just think that it would be. I think the best form would be to have the town, and it doesn't have to be to the mayor, but to the right party, to make sure that everyone knows that this is something that the town, that the select board supports as a whole. I think would be the most impactful way to do it. Just my 2 cents on this, but we could discuss it maybe on Tuesday.
Yeah,
but you would think that if we wanted to do it towards the end of next week, we would want to have invitation letters ready to roll as quickly as possible.
Okay.
At least if just a formal invitation of whatever else has been set up. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Okay. No. Okay. All right. So we'll put this on for next Tuesday and hopefully get it all get it going and have a great tour.
Not a 3-hour.
Just an hour tour.
An hour tour. An hour tour. 1 hour tour. All right. Okay. Item 9 is Town Administrator's Report.
Thank you. We had a few new employees start. Today, Jane Whitman started down at the Department of Public Works. We have now filled Kathy Bowen's position, who retired earlier this summer. Philip Driscoll moved into her position, and Ms. Whitman joined Chase's staff today. At long last, we have found an information technology assistant to work in the IT department with our much overworked Rob Mallett. So we are all very excited for Rob. Mar Harrington started in IT today. So just to take a load off of Rob, let him actually, decompress when he goes home and not have to worry about the phone call. He was away on it took a couple of days off a couple of weeks ago, and the next day there was an email issue, of course, his first day away. So this will make his life a little bit easier, and we're grateful for that. So, and extremely grateful for all the work that we've done and while we've been struggling to fill his position. Lastly, Carolyn Ho was hired in the Board of Health to be their health agent. So the Board of Health is now back to full staffing after having been down 2 individuals for quite some time. So good news for Caroline and her team in the Board of Health. It was mentioned earlier this evening, actually maybe before the meeting, but Porch Fest is this Saturday, September 9th, starting at noon, primarily in the Elliott Street area, but a little bit broader than that as well. A lot of information on their website. So it should be a nice day of music. Hopefully the weather holds up. What was the other thing I was going to add? Jay Funling mentioned this in our public comment. He did steal some of my thunder. I had distributed the actuarial report for our pension system, our retirement board system, in late August. The system is, as Jay mentioned, fully funded. By my count, that makes us one of 4 in Massachusetts with a fully funded retirement system, well ahead of the 2040 deadline for cities and towns to be fully funded. A lot of cities and towns are in county systems, but those aren't going to be funded in some time. This has a substantial impact on the town's operating budget moving forward. We're paying approximately $4.5 million to the retirement board to get to full funding. Now that we are at full funding, we no longer have a bill of $4.5 million to the retirement board. We had some discussions and voted on a policy last year about OPEB and what to do when we got to full funding. We anticipated it for fiscal 27. It's a couple of years early. That's a good problem to have. So we're working on evaluating that policy and figuring out what the next best steps are. So this is big news, a very exciting thing to happen, as boring as the topic might sound. But it has a substantial impact on our budget and on addressing our other long-term liability, which is retiree health insurance. The MBTA announced that the Red Line will be shut down, including the Mattapan high-speed line, for 16 days in October, the 14th through the 29th. We don't have any more information beyond that. As the T provides additional information, we assume the shuttle buses will follow their typical routes. But as we get more information, we'll be sure to share that with folks in town.
And that's from JFK down, is that right?
Correct, yes. The Red Line from Mattapan to Ashmont and then Ashmont to JFK is all going to be closed. They did say that they wouldn't, anybody riding the Mattapan high-speed line will have a direct ride if they want it all the way in and would not have to exit at Ashmont, but we're just going to have to understand how that will play out a little bit more. There wouldn't be a transfer at Ashmont, I should say. Lastly, Colin Loisel, who started July 31st as our assistant town administrator, is in Tingsboro this evening because the board in Tingsboro is offering him the position of town manager. This is quite an exciting time for Colin, but what had happened was the town manager in Tingsboro left, got a new job in Bedford, and the board in Tingsboro, when they were discussing what to do next, just said, why don't we hire Colin? And the board voted 5-0 to forego any kind of search to directly recruit him and make him an offer on a week ago tonight. And so it's quite an opportunity for him. He was only here for a very, very short time, but we saw his value, and clearly the folks in Tingsboro saw that value and saw it so much that they were ready to offer him a job in one night. So congratulations to him. He'll be in Milton for 2 more weeks, and then he'll be here on September 19th, and he'll be in Tingsboro on September 20th. So while we appreciate his work, especially if you've seen the communications change in the last 6 weeks, it's been due to him internally. He's jumped into a ton of projects. So we're hopeful to figure out what we're going to do with that position moving forward. And maybe 6 weeks under my tutelage is not all somebody needs to go get a new job. But we'll cross that bridge there. And lastly, I just wanted to make a comment. One thing that I'm hearing a bit is from staff is just concerns with comments both from residents and from board members about how they're being spoken about or treated. So I just would like folks to remember that policy decisions in this town are made by the elected boards. Staff are there to support and provide information, provide recommendations, provide information, certainly share their perspective, but at the end of the day, the elected bodies here in town are the ones making the big policy decisions. We're obviously in the middle of those conversations, but we just ask that ire and frustration can be directed to me. That is okay. I ask that you just give, I'm obviously speaking of the planning department staff in particular, but just give them the grace that they come to Milton every day, dedicating their time, many, many hours of night meetings, morning meetings, et cetera, to doing the job. And we're very, very grateful for that work. So just wanted to share that message with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. And just jumping off a couple of the things that you mentioned on the chair's report, just to put a point on it, the last thing you mentioned, we all signed up for this. The elected officials all signed up to be criticized and disparaged. And so if you want to disparage or criticize or have a difference of opinion, we're all here, and do it with us. And please lay off the staff if you can, because they work hard, and we're the ones who should be taking any of the heat that goes along with anything, not the staff. I will say, with respect to Mr. Loisel, it does show that Mr. Milano has a great aptitude for great hires. If someone that he selected is been chosen in less than 6 weeks, so I'm sure that he'll find someone who is just as good to fill that role very soon. Third, with respect to the pension liability, I just want to say that 10 or 15 years ago, when town staff and elected officials and warrant committee members, of which Ms. Conlon was one and I was one, many years ago when we were looking into paying off that liability, it seemed like a long ways away. The late 2020s seemed like a long ways away. So those who made those decisions, those, again, elected officials and warrant committee members, appointed town staff, appointed officials, they deserve a lot of credit for taking the initiative 10 and 15 years ago to get us on this road where we're in a very good position with respect to our pension liability. And then finally, again, jumping off from what Mr. Milano said, Porch Fest is this Saturday, noon to 6, and one of our members that I'm aware of, there may be others who are performing, but one of our members, Mr. Zoll, will be performing, and so anyone that wants to get out and criticize an elected official, show up and
just spare my bandmates.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
They didn't sign up for the public comment.
So look, everyone's looking forward to that, and we'll look forward. What time are you playing on Saturday?
4 p.m.
4 p.m.
Yes.
All right. So
Thank you.
Look for
Mr.
Mr. Look for Mr. Zoll. Is fair game. Fair game.
We've got rehearsal tomorrow night, so hopefully we'll sound all right.
All right. Okay. Ms. Musta.
I just wanted to add one thing. I wanted to do a shout out for the Milton National Night Out that was at the police station.
Yes.
I saw Mr. Milano over there. It was a great time. A lot of people showed up. Great weather. and thank the police for putting that on. It was a great community event, and thank the police for all that they do.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. All right, item 11, public comment response. Anything on that? Item 12, future meeting dates. We have next Tuesday. We have a public hearing for the Governor Stoughton Trust on the 19th, which the neighbors have expressed interest in that date, and so they're all aware of that. There was some discussion of maybe perhaps sending out notices to abutters. The Governor Stoughton Trust hasn't appropriated the money to do that. So, and there is a question about whether it's appropriate to spend Governor Stoughton Trust money to do that. So I think we'll try to get the word out through free media since it's the,
It seems like the neighborhood associations are aware of.
Yeah,
the
so
discussions already.
I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, the Governor Stoughton Trust could take that up. I guess we wanted to put it up next week, put on the agenda next week about whether we want to spend money, but I'm not sure that that's something we should be doing, and I see consensus on that. So, so we'll get the word out through free media and through the neighborhood associations. That's really that's a good way to do it as well. And then we have a meeting on the 26th. So, any issues with?
Just a reminder that I will be on my honeymoon on September 26th, and I will not be zooming in.
All right. Okay. All right. All right.
3 days into the marriage, don't want to spoil it.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Not only fair game for the public, but fair game for the new wife. All right. So that's good to know. All right. If there's nothing further on that, executive session is item 13, and I will make the motion to go in an executive session for the three items. Let me first ask Mr. Milano if we will be returning to open session, if there is a need to return to open session or a purpose to return to open session.
I think potentially for the landing lease agreements.
Okay, all right. So we'll be returning to open session. So I'll move to enter into executive session to discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, Town Landing, Wharf Street, based on my belief that discussion on this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the Select Board, and the Select Board will return to open session.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those all those in favor? It's a roll call vote. Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. I move to enter into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, Milton firefighters, Local 1116, based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the Select Board. The Select Board will return to open session.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. And finally, I move to enter into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to litigation filed by the Town of Milton versus the Federal Aviation Administration under 22-152 U.S. Court of Appeals First Circuit, based on my belief that discussion of this matter in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Select Board. The Select Board will return to open session.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. Thank you, everyone. We will retire to executive session, and we will return to open session for, I believe, a very brief time after the executive session. We are now moving to executive session. Back to the September 5th, 2023 meeting of the Milton Select Board. We've returned from executive session. We'll now go to item 16, discussion approval lease agreements for the Town Landing Wharf Street. I believe we have two to consider, one for Lot C at the Town Landing and one for 25 Wharf Street. Oh,
We're back.
Are we good?
It was a picture of the empty room for a minute.
Oh.
It's a little freaky.
all right.
We're here now.
All right, all right, okay. Wow. All right, so, what I said came through.
Yes.
All right, fair enough.
Sure.
Which is the important part. All right, sorry, I was just gonna say that's the important part, but that would be.
Of course it is.
That would be. negative.
Pretentious?
Yeah, pretentious, exactly. All right, so we have two lease agreements for consideration. Does someone want to make
Oh.
a motion?
No, I don't have it in front of me.
I'll make a motion.
Thanks.
I'll make a motion to approve the lease agreement with the Neponset Rowing Club for Lot C at the Town Landing in the amount of $7,200 in year one, and a lease of 3 years?
5 years.
Five.
I'm sorry, 5-year lease, with increasing rent at an amount of
2.5.
2.5% per year.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 2 under item 16 is the lease agreement with the Milton Yacht Club for 25 Wharf Street. I'll make a motion to approve a lease agreement with the Milton Yacht Club.
Your mic's on.
Oh, no.
I could hear you through Aaron.
You could hear him through
All
me.
right, do I need to restart?
You might.
Just restart?
For the record.
All right, let's restart.
Okay.
I'll do it quickly. All right, we have to restart because mics weren't on and recordings weren't being made. Good evening again, everyone. This is the return of the Milton Select Board meeting for September 5th, 2023. We have returned from executive session. And item 16 is discussion approval of lease agreements for the Town Landing Wharf Street. We have two lease agreements for consideration. First, I will move to approve a lease agreement with the Neponset Rowing Club for Lot C at the Town Landing in the amount of $7,200 in the first year for a 5-year lease with increases of 2.5% per year.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. The second item under item 16 is a proposed lease agreement with the Milton Yacht Club for 25 Wharf Street. I'll make a motion to approve the lease agreement with the Milton Yacht Club for 25 Wharf Street in the amount of $2,500 per year for 5 years.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion?
I just want to make a
Mr.
quick
Zoll.
note. Since Mr. Wells, we're assuming that his phone may have died or computer may have died, but he participated in this executive session, and I think he will be in favor of what's happening. But obviously, we can't say that he's voting for it, but I think that it's worth noting that he did join the discussion in the executive session.
And I think it's worth noting, I think it's a point well taken that he was involved in the executive session. It's also worth noting that Mr. Wells's efforts have brought us to this point.
Yes, I
His
think
efforts
that's
on
right.
behalf of the Town Landing and the.
He's there.
Yeah.
and the
He's back
town.
now.
Oh, he is back, okay.
I'm back.
Oh, all right.
I got, when we went from executive session, I couldn't get the link to get back in.
All right, Richard, we voted already the Neponset Rowing Club lease, that's okay?
I would add, and I heard Mr. Zoll's comments. He's
Okay.
correct. I
Okay.
would vote yes.
All right, and so the motion we have now is the motion to approve the lease agreement with the Milton Yacht Club for 25 Wharf Street, the amount of $2,500 a year for 5 years.
Which Ms.
Motions,
Bradley's
and that
second.
motion's been made and
I
seconded.
had seconded it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. All right, item 17 is motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. It will be a roll call vote. Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yep.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us, and we will be back next week on September 12th, 2023 at 7 p.m. Thank you very much.